Hello Avatar fans and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is the official podcast for the fan site avatarthelastairbender.online.com. This is going to be our next Rise of Kyoshi podcast. This is going to be, I suppose, part 2, and we're going to be covering chapters 11 to 21 in this podcast. That is the chapter called the Inheritance, all the way up to the chapter called Preparation. So this is the middle group of chapters from the book, and then we'll finish things off on the next podcast with the end of the book. I'm going to be your host for the podcast, Morgan, Airspeed Prime, and joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So, before we get into Kyoshi, we have some news topics to get to, including one that I completely forgot to mention in the last podcast, even though I had it all ready to go. I just completely forgot to mention it. So we'll start with that. And that is that we finally got the full solicitation reveal of Legend of Korra Runes of the Empire Part 3. So we got the cover, we got the release date, and we got the description. So, Runes of the Empire Part 3 is going to be out February 25th, 2020. And the description for it reads as follows. Kuvira's true nature is revealed, and the Earth Kingdom will feel the consequences. Thanks to Commander Guan and Dr. Sheng's brainwashing technology, all hope for a fair election in the Earth Kingdom is lost. Korra works with Toph, Sue, and Kuvira to plan a means to rescue not just the brainwashed Mako, Bolin, and Asami, but everyone else caught up in Guan's plan. With the Earth Empire potentially on the rise again, Kuvira pulls another trick from her sleeve. But whose side is she truly on? Written by series co-creator Michael Dante DiMartino and illustrated by Michelle Wong, with consultation by Brian Konietzko and Tim Hedrick, this is the ultimate conclusion of the beloved television series. And the cover obviously features a brainwashed sort of kind of evil zombie looking Mako, Asami, and Bolin, with Korra and Kuvira fighting on the front, and then Zhao Fu in the background. So, Greg, what are your thoughts on us finally getting this information on Part 3 of Runes of the Empire?
Yeah, it definitely gives you a good perspective on where the story's going and what sort of happened in the interim. I think it's pretty interesting that it gives you the whole sort of idea of what's happened and sort of, I don't know, it definitely, I don't know, it feels like it gives a lot away, but I guess if it wasn't so early, you still wouldn't, have such a, I guess a sort of spoilerish type of preview to the next, book. But no, I think it definitely sounds interesting. I mean, it's sort of, we sort of wondered, about Kuvira and what side she was really on, or what her real goals are, just because it always seems to be that way. But it definitely seems interesting. The cover definitely looks pretty interesting, the way that they have the characters laid out and the Sami in the middle. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how they do all the relationships and all the just inner workings of things in this one as they wrap it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I never really mind too much when these kind of books kind of spoil what happened in the previous part, even though we don't have it. We had an idea that the brainwashing was going to be an important part, and someone that we didn't want to get hit was going to get hit with it. So I think the speculation was it was going to be Kuvira, because I think Guan and Sheng directly said maybe we should re-educate her. But the actual twist that it seems like it's actually the rest of Team Avatar that gets hit is actually interesting, in that it means Kuvira is actually free to sort of still be in her right mind for most of the series and continuing on, what side is she on and so on. And it will at least give us that kind of, I suppose, unique dynamic of seeing Mako and Bolin and Asami getting to fight against, Korra and Kuvira, I assume. And that could be interesting, especially if they go all out with the bending. Again, we don't know the exact specifics on how the brainwashing works and how much control they have and so on, but it looks like at the very least it's going to be some form of a fight type thing that happens, and all the main characters are involved. Toph is going to be sticking around until Part 3. That's nice. Sue is there. Kuvira is there. I think this is getting to the point that we want. I hope it has a good ending. They seem to still be teasing Kuvira's true nature revealed, pulls another trick, whose side is she truly on. They could go either way on it. I think that's the thing with Kuvira. I think most people sort of want the more sort of kind of redemption route, maybe not the full redemption, but close to it. But they could just go the road of having her escape at the end and sort of be off and still being the villain and make it a larger arc. So I'm not really sure, but I'm excited. I'm very, very excited for Runes of the Empire. So I really am interested to see where they go with things here. And yeah, it seems like we switch from Gao Ling to Zhao Fu. So I think that confirms to us that we're gonna get the details on like what's happening with the elections and how is Zhao Fu involved in things. But yeah, other thing there is the mention in the consultation section that it's not just Brian, it's also Tim Hedrick being brought in. This is the first, I think, the first one of these like comic trilogies he's worked on. He's done stuff I think like the Lost Adventures before, a lot of the Voltron Legendary Defender comics. I think he was actually the writer on those comics, so he's familiar with comics. And he is definitely one of the main writers you associate with both Avatar and Korra. So it's interesting that they're bringing him in, especially on like a part 3, when on the previous 2 parts it was just Brian doing the consultation. So the speculation is kind of like, is he being brought in because Mike and Brian are busy on the Netflix show and they need someone else to get involved? That seems like a cool way to sort of set him up if there is going to be some, time stuff that means Mike and Brian can't be involved in everything. But do you have any thoughts on Tim Hedrick being sort of a surprise inclusion here on the sort of creators list?
Yeah, no, I guess it is interesting. I mean, if you had to find someone else that, that would be the person to sort of bring on board. And yeah, no, I think, I don't know, I guess, the whole time thing that you mentioned that has been mentioned before, it doesn't seem like that would be something that could come into factor. But, I think it can definitely work out well, especially if they continue on with the comics and stuff. I think that's, that's the next best person to sort of get involved with this.
And then yeah, February 25th, 2020. This is like the furthest kind of in advance we sort of have a Dark Horse book. Obviously, there's still Runes of the Empire Library Edition and an Imbalanced Library Edition, which I assume are going to be after this. But in terms of new books, this is as far as we go. So February 2020 is like the furthest into the future that we have. It means that, like, I suppose definitely before the end of the year, we probably need to be finding out about what's next for Avatar, what's next for Korra. Because going into the next piece of information, news topic, we didn't get any information from the San Diego Comic-Con panel. The big Avatar panel that we discussed last time out is having all of the people you would want. You had Mike there, FCE, Faith Aaron Hicks, and then they also added Gene Yang on. All the main people involved in like most of the recent content, and basically nothing came out of it. It was just your standard panel of just them talking about stuff, answering the moderator questions. There was a brief audience Q&A section, but it didn't seem like they were really there to answer any of the interesting questions. And so about all I really took out of it myself was that someone asked him about like, are we going to get the Iroh Spirit World story? And Mike's just said, that's a story I'd like to see too. Someone asked him, is it possible for Korra to get the past lives back? Which I thought was a really good question. Like finally someone like asking that question, and he just said, I don't know. So non-answer to that question. I think someone asked, I don't know what the exact question or wording was, but like, is there going to be another animated series? And he basically just said like, no future plans for an animated series. I don't have context on if that was like a really hard no, or it's just like there's nothing planned right now type thing. And then I think it was to the point where I was kind of like, did they even like discuss any of the books at this panel at all? Like I know on the projector they were showing like a couple of like preview pages, I think, just to get across like this person talking on the panel did this book and stuff like that, but I didn't get the impression they went over like, this is the next book coming out, here's Team Avatar Tales, here's Runes of the Empire Part 2, here's the Part 3 stuff that we just revealed, or anything like that. It felt like they just like went in there, assumed the audience knew who they were, and just answered the basic questions of like, who's your favorite character to write, which we've heard over and over again. So I don't know, Greg, what was your thoughts on what did or did not come out of the panel? Did you see any of the like small amount of coverage that there was for this panel?
I mean, I saw maybe a few things on Twitter, and I saw you mention a couple of things. But other than that, not much of it got to, at least from what I saw, to sort of the wider type of sites or anything like that. So, yeah, I mean, it definitely seemed like it was just, at least from the outside, it seemed like it was just sort of one of those panels that's sort of, somewhat neat to go to if you're there, but not much as far as, new news or anything like that.
Yeah, like it's just one of those ones that I sort of bring this up every time there's one of these panels and nothing comes out of it. Is like, kind of, what's the point of them in a way? In that, I don't really feel people attending the panel would have got that much out of it, because there's a separate thing that is the signing with these people, and that's probably the more interesting thing for being there in person. It kind of feels like you're queuing up ahead of time, like watching multiple panels, waiting for this Avatar one, and you're just listening to basically stuff you've heard in every interview Mike's done before, any of the text-based interviews you've seen Faith Aaron Hicks do, or the recent ones with FCE, and then the older ones with Gene Yang. It felt like there was really nothing here. Um, there was a few prizes, but like, I assume a lot of people who are into the comics already have like the hardcover edition of the latest comic and some stuff like that. So, it feels a little bit like they're just doing the most basic of basic panels, and it's not really for anyone specifically, because they're not using it as like an advertising tool necessarily, because they're not talking a lot about the books and telling you what's out next and so on, and then they're not revealing new information for like the hardcore fans. So it's a little bit like, what's the point? Because like the descriptions for the panels are the same every single time. So I don't know, like you've attended a few of these, so like what's your take on like your take on like how these go when like you go in person versus what they could be and what they've been in the past when like the shows have been on and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's completely different from when you have the show. Like the whole idea of the panel is just geared differently when they're going to show, either an episode or they're going to talk about a new season or anything like that. Since I have been to a bunch of those for Core specifically, I never got to go to any for the original series. But as far as the ones that are just more like recap ones, yeah, I mean, they are. I mean, it's cool because you're there and everyone else is there, so there's that whole sort of like camaraderie thing if you're like actually there in the place. But I mean, as far as like what they talk about, the moderator talking about various things that if you already know about it, you already know about it. But I don't know. I mean, I think it's like a half and half thing as far as being there, as far as like people who know what they're already going to say about versus other people who are going there either just because they're sort of like there just to be there, or they don't really know that much news, and this is like the one time that they would actually get news. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, it's always hit or miss. Most of the ones recently have not been that great or anything like that. I mean, I think for the ones that I've been to that I've given you the information on or whatever, it hasn't been anything like amazing that comes out of them. Sometimes you'll get like some screenshots first or stuff like that. That's usually the most that you'll get, since like we've mentioned before, most of the announcements usually come out ahead of time anyway. They don't usually wait until the convention, which would be cool if they did try that once or twice. Maybe they'll do that for the next one, since nothing seemed to have come out of SDCC. So yeah, I don't know, it definitely is hit or miss. It seems like they've been as of late, they've been slightly more interesting, at least the ones at New York Comic Con, just because they have, a few things that do come out, even if the actual release dates are already sort of known. But yeah, it's definitely not as hyped as they once were from before. And then the fan panels are a completely sort of different sort of aspect when they have those.
Yeah, like it feels like Dark Horse are basically kind of doing the Avatar fan panel, but it's the official panel, so it feels so weird that like it's basically missing the one thing that makes the official panel interesting. In that, there's only so many times you can be interested by Mike saying that his favorite character is Aang, and that like if he could have an element, it would be airbending, and then like all of the comic writers basically saying, oh yeah, Toph's the easiest character to write and stuff like that. The same questions over and over again. So it's almost like the moderators of the panel, like, could you just ask some more directed questions? And that at the timing of this panel, it's like preview pages for Imbalance Part 3, Team Avatar Tales, and Runes of the Empire Part 2. Like, we know all of these books are like finished at this point in time. They're the next books that are coming out. Preview them a bit, because you probably have at least some people in the audience who'd be interested to know what's going on there. Talk about them. They're not always news, like especially like they're all middle or end parts, so they're never really given to sites as like news articles or anything like that. So why not show them there at the panel and have something come out? But you know, I think we just have to learn to accept that these panels are not, they don't have news at them basically at this point. And even going into New York Comic Con, there also probably won't be any like news at the panel. The announcement will come beforehand, and it will more than likely be what the next Avatar comic is, plus potentially a new artist and stuff like that. But one piece of news did sneak out of San Diego Comic Con and has since been sort of given full clarification. And yeah, I just randomly happened to come across this piece of news that out of the Diamond Select Toys panel, they announced that they were doing Avatar: The Last Airbender action figures. And we got one really blurry image of, you know, three characters, you know, oh look, there's blurry Zuko, blurry Aang, blurry Katara, and then it just had Walgreens. So the obvious inference from that was like, okay, the figures are going to be Walgreens exclusive. News was coming out all over the place. The figures have since been like officially solicited. Now we know, I think, most of the details. So Diamond Select Toys is going to be the company making these, sculpting them, and so on. It is a first wave of 3 figures, so we get season 3 Zuko, season 3 Aang, and book 1 Katara. There are 3 characters here, 7-inch scale. They're going to come with accessories and interchangeable parts. $20 per figure. Release date for comic shops seems to be December 18th, 2019. Online toy shops and stuff like that will probably be getting it in around January. As for the Walgreens exclusive, I still don't have full clarification on that. It probably means Walgreens are going to be getting them earlier than December, or they're going to be the only non-specialist or online store that's actually going to have them in store. I'm not really specifically sure on that, but this is a big piece of news. I put up, I think, 2 videos on my channel about this, and they've been doing pretty well, so it shows the excitement level for something like this, because most of the figure merch for Avatar of late has been like Funko Pops, it's been like chibi statues or stuff like that. So we have sort of been, you know, crying out for just, you know, standard normal figures, and it's been since like basically 2006 since we've ever had any of these, and it's like Katara's first proper action figure, so this is really cool to see. So before we get into specifics on the figures, just in general, Greg, what were your thoughts upon seeing this kind of sneak out announcement from San Diego Comic-Con?
Yeah, it was pretty surprising. I definitely was not sort of expecting anything sort of like that, because like you mentioned, we're always sort of talking about figures or what the figures used to be and how the whole thing went down with how they sort of attempted to release them and sort of the backlash that they got from them. So no, this was definitely interesting to see it. I mean, I did see that original sort of blurry image, and I was just like, okay, that's cool, and it said Walgreens, so then it's like, I guess that's like a good place to go, and like, you know, what other, you know, at least in America, like has like a big sort of like toy store type presence, and I guess Walgreens would be one of those stores that still is around. But then we finally get the full image of it, and then it sort of changes it a bit.
Yeah, so yeah, I saw a lot of people. I got the impression like not really familiar with the sort of you know, toy industry stuff. Of just like, why is Walgreens the place that's selling like high end action figures? But me being into Transformers a lot, as far as I'm aware, the reason this has kind of come about is because like with the closure of Toys R Us in America, most of the Toys R Us exclusives basically switched over to Walgreens as like one of the only places who takes exclusive stuff, and that's why they just happen to have them for some reason. But anyway, yeah, 3 figures here. The description on the solicitation is quite interesting given the selection of figures. Let's see, this assortment of 7-inch scale action figures shines a spotlight on season 3 of the hit animated series. And then you go to Katara, and it's like, season 3, Katara. This is book 1 Katara. It's a really, really nice book 1 Katara figure, but the idea is I think most of the fandom would prefer book 3 Katara in like any piece of merchandise, basically. But I can let them away with this one because it is Katara's first action figure, basically. So I can understand them going for original Katara, her first ever figure. if it's successful, we can always get book three Katara later down the line. But yeah, really nice details here. We have two separate images, and one is just the figure's standard pose, and then one is showing off one of the accessories. So the accessory here for Katara is not really that good. It's her with some sort of a water ball, and it's weirdly attached because it's a separate hand that you basically take off the normal hand, put the fist on, and it's got just like a plastic stalk coming off it attached to this like perfectly spherical clear ball of plastic that's meant to be water. It's not great, but the figure I think looks really good. I think the paint job on it, and especially the sculpting on the face and like the painting on the eyes, I think comes across really, really well. And with Katara especially, the detail on the hair looks, I think, really, really good. So I think a lot of people are happy that Katara's finally getting a figure, and it looks to be a very good figure. So what are your thoughts on the Katara figure?
Yeah, no, I think that one is pretty good, at least the actual design of it. Yeah, I guess, book three one would be cooler since that's sort of the one that we sort of ended with. So I guess it's sort of interesting. I wonder if that's just sort of like a design or a mold sort of, reason why they went with that specific look for her. I mean, I guess, she could switch her hairstyle back to whatever by the end of it, regardless, but it would have been interesting to see a different look. But no, I think it's interesting, and the sort of attachment, I guess, I don't know. I guess it kind of works. I mean, it has to be attached in some way, right? So it can't be sort of like the other ones where it's sort of like on a stand and it's just sort of floating in space. So I guess it kind of works, but no, I think the base level of the figure, like you said, is pretty good.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there probably is something with regards to like they probably have to do a lot of work on sculpting the book three Katara hair just because it's so long. It's there's so many like layers and details to it because it's effectively like what she has here plus it's like much thicker. And if they're going for articulated figures, like I suppose it basically means that book three Katara would have to have like fully articulated hair basically to get the poses that you want. So that might be harder to do than just her standard style, which is just the big kind of braid coming down the back, which isn't really going to get in the way. Um, Next up, Aang. So we have season 3 Aang here. Looks pretty good. The accessory that we can see for him, we actually get two of them here from the pictures. One is obviously the staff in the glider staff in the closed position, and then we can also see between the two pictures that there's clearly some form of a head or face swap in that we have sort of neutral happy Aang, and then we have determined or kind of angry Aang faces. So I'm not really sure because we don't get too many shots of the sides and stuff like that. More than likely, it probably is just a full head swap, so you probably do get like separate Aang heads to have the different expressions, and then the staff makes complete sense, and we'll have to wait and see what the rest of it is. But in general, again, I like the design. That's my favorite kind of like Aang design. I'm very interested to see how the paint on the arrow tattoos looks. You can get a slight hint of it on the side of one of his arms, and of course on the forehead, but I really want to see how it looks like going down the back of his head and his back and stuff like that. How it works with like the articulation and so on. There's no way it's going to be perfect because there's going to be positions where this continuous stream of the arrow is broken. But I'm interested to see how it overall looks. But what are your thoughts on the Aang figure?
I think the Aang one is pretty good. I think that might be my favorite out of all of them. But no, especially the bow staff, I think that works well. I think this one is probably the most sort of like on point that I really sort of like out of these three.
And then we get season 3 Zuko here. So we see that his accessory is going to be at least one fire fist. We don't know what the rest of them, the stuff that we get with him is. But again, it's his classic end of this kind of season outfit. Looks really good. The nice kind of painting around his scar. We don't get the best look across both pictures of his face, in that it's kind of at an angle. He's kind of looking down a little bit. So I definitely want to see what the face looks like a little bit more close up. But I think it looks pretty solid. I suppose you'd be hoping he probably comes with a sword. Both swords probably would be a nice other accessory for him, and maybe another fire effect part, and then maybe like a different expression. But yeah, I definitely like it. I think across all of the figures, I do want to know, like, are the outfits made of, like, I suppose, like vinyl, like flexible plastic? It definitely doesn't look like it's fabric, so I assume that's what it's going to have to be, given that they're articulated. But your thoughts on the Zuko figure?
Yeah, no, I think the Zuko one is pretty good overall from what you can see in these pictures, and I do like his sort of like Fire Fist. I think that one works a bit better than Katara's for sure, just the way that they have it sort of designed, at least from what I can see from the one angle picture that I've seen. But no, I think overall it looks pretty good. I think it should be interesting to see how they actually move and how they articulate overall.
Yeah, the fire effect part definitely looks pretty good because the way they've done it here is that it's just you take out the Zuko standard hand and put on this fist which has the fire effect part already attached on. So I think that's probably the best way I've kind of seen one of these effects done, as opposed to trying to do some sort of like plug in and have all these ports all over the fist and stuff like that, like they did on the more gimmicky Mattel figures in the past, or having to go as far as to basically make a separate stand to have like the effect part like held up in front of the character. That's what they have to do. Like there is a difficulty with getting these bending effect parts unless you're going to go completely over the top with it. But yeah, I'm interested to see how many accessories that we get. Like I suppose just with these three characters, like what other accessories do you think we're going to get based off what we've seen already and what the characters are known for?
Oh yeah, that would be pretty interesting. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of different things that they could do with them. I mean, for Aang, it'd be interesting if they did something, with like his classic sort of air scooter. If there was some way to sort of get that to sort of work with his sort of attachments. If his feet can sort of, be posed in that position, that might be interesting to see. I mean, you already mentioned the source for Zuko. That would be like the one main thing that I would think that they would have if they didn't do some other type of fire move that he could have. Like they could do like like the fire daggers that he's done before. That might be a cool and more of a simpler one to actually sort of work with, just with everything that he sort of has. And I don't know what I would want more for Katara, as far as accessories, because I think I don't know, it'd be interesting to see if they could do some other water effects that would look different. I'm not really sure about her.
Yeah, like in terms of stuff like the vial of spirit water, that's something you could give her.
Mm.
Beyond that, like I assume Katara will get a determined expression like Aang has, so an extra head probably more than likely. Um, and then other than that, like some sort of like water whip style effect part, something that's maybe bigger. That could be difficult to do though, but I could maybe see them doing some sort of a thing where like they have like the water effect part and it's already like pre-attached to like both of her hands or something like that, and it's maybe a flexible type thing, and you can put it on her just to get the sense of like that kind of standard water bending pose where she has the sort of a like U shape of water behind her back or something like that. But I'm not really sure. Qatar is definitely the one where like they could go a bunch of different places with it. But yeah, this is our first wave coming at the towards the end of the year. I see for people in America, there's already like pre-orders up in a lot of the big kind of online toy shops like Big Bad Toy Store, Toy Wiz, and stuff like that. I haven't yet seen any places that have, I suppose, that are in Europe or the UK or anything like that for better shipping for anyone else. Put the figures up yet, but I'm definitely keeping my eye out to see what the best place to get them is. But yeah, I'm really excited for this. If you had to guess, just after the Series One announcement, what do you think the second wave of three figures would be?
Oh yeah, I mean, I guess they should just continue with the whole group. So I mean, they definitely have to do Sokka and Toph. I mean, I guess everyone always wants Suki as well, just as far as just to get the whole sort of like main sort of group of people. But I mean, beyond that, I mean, there's so many characters that we can do, really for the whole sort of series, and it'll be interesting to see, if I guess they only focus on sort of like the original series, or when or if they sort of like branch out to core and stuff like that. I think that would be interesting to see how that goes or what their process is. I think I just generally hope that they do well overall, just knowing the history of sort of Avatar toys in general. I think it's probably in a way better place than it was in the past, even if the show, isn't on or hasn't been on for quite a while, which I guess is probably the surprise for them, for us in general, just them sort of coming out with these. I mean, I guess, this is sort of like, has the okay from, Nick and Viacom and all that. So if that seems to be as good, and since this is more of like, like a dedicated, at least from what I understand, you probably know more about it than me, like a dedicated sort of like toy brand, that this is something that they could, continue producing if it's profitable and it's worth them sort of doing, rather than sort of the other ones that we've got in the past where it's sort of these like offshoot sort of companies that are sort of doing them. And I have them and they definitely look good, but they're not, they don't really have the drive or the sort of backing to sort of continue them as much, other than some of the sort of like odd sort of design ones. So it should be interesting to see how this does overall.
Yeah, like if you look up Diamond Selects or other stuff, they do figures like this for lots of other brands. The most like obvious like popular ones are that they do like Avengers like MCU kind of figures,
Hmm.
and I looked up some of them. The sculpts look amazing, like really accurate. Like the I think it's like Infinity War Captain America looks really good because like in the movie, obviously you can see like the details of like the fabric on his like uniform, and that comes across in that as well. Now, obviously, it's kind of simpler designs here because they're meant to be kind of smooth to match the animation here, but I think they've captured things well, and it should be pretty good as that sort of accessible but high end kind of action figure. And like you say, I think these will do better because of that, in that they are primarily going to be available through online comic stores and then Walgreens. So I think the more limited release will probably allow them to see that success a bit better. And from what I've seen, the reaction on like the videos I've put up about them is that people are very excited for these. The only worry is like, where can I order them? Basically, like, I don't want to miss out. Basically, that sort of thing. So yeah, once we start to see pre-orders go up in more places, I think these will be a success. My guess for Series 2 will be that I think Salka and Toph are like kind of like for sure's, like you have to do them. The third figure, like I'm thinking Iroh, just because like he is like the fan favorite character, and I can see him just looking really nice as a action figure with like the T accessory and stuff like that. Beyond that, I'm like, yeah, I can see the idea for maybe doing a Suki. I could see them maybe just throwing in a Korra if they want to sort of test, like
Mm.
doing Korra figures in as well, just being like it's Avatar focused, but there will be a few Korra figures. That way, like people buying them as like the full set will kind of to save money, like buy the full set of three, but they'll also get the core one, something like that. That's sort of what these kind of figure companies tend to do with these type of things.
Mm.
Like other companies do, like the if you get all the figures from a set, they come with a piece of a figure that makes like a bigger figure. That's not happening here, but they do that to sort of sell all the figures in the wave. So yeah, they're definitely cool. That's a big announcement, and it took a while to come out of San Diego Comic Con, but it is pretty notable. Just extra merch coming out. So yeah, let's get into the Rise of Kyoshi, the second part of our discussion. Just I suppose quick thing here. I know FCE posted on Twitter that. Number 3 in the New York Times bestseller in terms of I think YA novels. So quick after release, that's really good to see. Again, I don't really know what exactly to make of the statistics on it and stuff like that, but the fact that like most of the Avatar comics hit that list at some point, this hitting the book list, I think is a good thing, given that like I don't remember it being like marketed that much really. So I don't know. Do you have any reaction to it being on the bestseller list?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely cool. I wonder, yeah, like you said, I don't really know how, those stats sort of work overall, but, I guess just in terms of popularity and it sort of, rising that high, I think that's pretty good. At least it, I guess it sort of, shows what we've all sort of hoped is that, it's worth, making these type of books, and that, this shows that that's definitely worth it, and they should probably continue doing this, after these two books. So it's definitely good news.
Yeah, and yeah, I've seen nothing but positivity about these books in terms of more and more people getting it and stuff like that. I've seen tons of posts on like the subreddit for Avatar of just people saying they got the book, they're reading it right now, and Really no negative responses at all from what I've seen. So where we left off after chapter 10, which was the last one we covered, lots of stuff happened. So Jianzhu had just basically sacrificed Yun to a spirit, so Yun is presumed dead. Jianzhu directly killed Kelsang. Kyoshi is confirmed to be the Avatar, and she's just entered the Avatar state. So we ended on a pretty big cliffhanger, and we go into chapter 11, which is called The Inheritance. And it's interesting here that like the chapter opens up with actually like a flashback, and the way they do this chapter is like we cut to like the aftermath of the Avatar state, and we have Kyoshi reflecting on happy times with Kelsang now that he's gone, and also her escape from Jianzhu, who has been revealed to have actually survived the encounter with the Avatar state by basically like burrowing himself like deep into the mountainside here. That's his method to get away from the Avatar state, which is a pretty good move, to just go as deep as possible from a sort of almost mindless power attacking him. And she wakes up and just sees the amount of damage that she's done, but also immediately acknowledges the fact that she's effectively like, I suppose the idea is like destroyed Kelsang's body, like his body's missing in all of this, that every trace of him is gone, and she's kind of done that, even though it was Jianzhu who actually killed him. So yeah, that's the start of this chapter. So yeah, I suppose just reacting to the aftermath of everything. What are your thoughts on the start of chapter 11?
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely interesting how they describe, sort of the aftermath and how they relate that to sort of her past and her sort of, things that she's had to gone through, and how she can sort of, I guess almost sort of see things almost turn full circle in sort of a bad way, even though, her past, good amount of years she has been, more positive. But no, I think it's definitely, it's always interesting seeing, sort of the Avatar state, from what we saw in this series, and, various characters sort of go into it, and, seeing, the control or lack of control that they have. I think they did a pretty good job of describing it. And I think the story of her sort of past, even though, she didn't have anything to do with sort of destruction when she was younger, just sort of relating it to what she currently sees, even if it is just sort of like a quick story. I think it gets the point across pretty well as giving you a decent sort of backstory into her sort of past that, we knew it was pretty bad overall, but just seeing how she acted in the past and how she, is trying to go forward, I think is a good, comparison point.
Yeah, it's with Kelsang gone now, just getting that reflection of just how important he was to her. I think we already got from the previous chapters that like the dearest person in the world to Kyoshi, for taking her in, the one person in Yokoya who helped her. And this is just a quick 2 scenes in the middle of this chapter to get across that he left her one time because he had something to do with the air temples. He left money with the family for them to look after her. He came back and she had a fever, and he, after that incident, decided to look after her even more. And then we get this other sequence of him. It's like special kite day in Yokoya. Everyone has kites. Kyoshi doesn't. He gives her the best kite of all, and that is that like he attaches rope to himself and he glides around in his glider as she holds onto it, and it's just this fun, basically father-daughter moment. And it's nice to get across like that's what Jianzhu has done to her here, taking away one of her friends in Yun and her father figure. That's why the anger and rage and desire that we're going to see over the remaining chapters is so intense, because of just the impact on Kyoshi of all of this. But she escapes from Jianzhu by, of course, grabbing Peng Peng, who's here in all of this. So she takes Peng Peng, goes back to Yokoya, and the idea is that, like, effectively she's saying she's going back to Yokoya for the last time. It's not home anymore. She'll never consider Yokoya home. And that's an interesting setup, given what the future name of this place is going to be. So we're going to see more development on this, but for now she's returning there to get her possessions, basically her inheritance, as the chapter title is. So she gets the trunk, the mysterious trunk, and the journal, as well as taking the Avatar relic, the clay turtle, and the armored kind of dress, the armored green dress from the iceberg. And what's so interesting about this is that she basically takes an item from kind of all of the main characters here. Zhu was the one who gave her the kind of armored dress. Her parents are the ones who gave her the journal and the trunk. And then the relic is effectively, Kelsang's items. So these are her main possessions. She takes them with her, and we actually get to see what's inside it as well. So that's the importance of this chapter as well. She cracks open the trunk, and it reveals that the war fans, two war fans, are inside it. The headdress and lots of makeup are inside it, and then the journal reveals what they are. In that it's effectively her mother's kind of battle gear is what this is. So very, very interesting stuff here. What were your thoughts on the reveal of like these inheritance of Kyoshi, these items she's had just from before Yokoya even?
Yeah, no, it definitely, it keys you into sort of like what's to come and sort of her sort of history. I mean, I think it's always interesting getting these sort of reveals because if you watch the show and you know the character, or even I guess if you just look at the cover of the book, you can sort of, see that, oh, okay, so these items, they have some importance. They come, pretty important in her, her near future. So it's interesting just to see how that's sort of revealed and see who these elements actually come from. And then, later on in these set of chapters, when you get sort of even more details on it, it's nice to sort of come back to it. I think this is, I think from any of the sort of like reveals in the book, this is probably one of the easier ones to sort of follow the thread line as far as, where they come into play later on and sort of thinking back to them.
Mm-hmm. We also see her meet up with Rangi here, and Rangi is immediately on board with, going with Kyoshi. Kyoshi does have to really suddenly explain to her that like Yun and Kelsang are dead, Jianzhu's betrayed everyone, and it takes a while for Rangi to accept this, and that it goes into like the next chapter. But she's going with Kyoshi because she is Kyoshi's friend here. So the start of the kind of loyalty of Rangi to Kyoshi, because of course Rangi has to be the bodyguard to the Avatar. She's that devoted to the Avatar. It's Kyoshi now, apparently, so she's going ahead with this. And we'll see a lot of interesting Rangi Kyoshi scenes, but this is just the initial one of she's for sure coming with Kyoshi. But what are your thoughts on this? This is our kind of main team at the very start. It's just Kyoshi and Rangi on their own with Yun gone now.
Yeah, no, I think, it makes sense, with Rangi's sort of, her sort of honor sensibility that, and just, her being, Kyoshi's friend, that she would go with her, even though, it is, a shock to her system to sort of hear this sort of news, especially with someone else that she cared about so much as well as Kyoshi. But, with Kyoshi, I guess, sort of being so determined to go, despite everything that sort of happened, she does, make the good choice of sort of going with her and just, noting the fact that, Kyoshi isn't necessarily the best, type of person to sort of go off on her own. So it's definitely a good thing that Rangi chose to go with her.
Yeah, because like as it's sort of pointed out over these chapters, like at this point, Kyoshi is basically just like a servant at the mansion. She knows some earthbending, but basically has no training, no technique at all, is not really used to fighting or anything like that. She's strong because of how tall she is and has powerful bending, but that's really about it. So Rangi has to do a lot of this just survival kind of stuff here. But yeah, we go into chapter 12 here, which is called The Decision, and it is a Rangi Kyoshi focused chapter. It's fairly short, just getting across more of the Rangi Kyoshi dynamic. Rangi struggling to accept everything that's just been told to her, but it is true. And then figuring out, okay, where are they going here? What Jianzhu said is correct. He has connections across the entire world. They're not going to be able to get Kyoshi the training she needs from the standard benders. They can't just go to some school and have Kyoshi learn, because Jianzhu will be alerted. And we find out immediately, like, Kyoshi is kind of running a little scared from Jianzhu, and that will come up much later on as well. So she can't get any of these sort of noble, respected masters. And we find out right at the end of the chapter, Kyoshi, just to herself, she's not revealing it fully to Rangi yet, but she only really wants to learn bending and get her avatar training to kill Jianzhu. At this point, she really doesn't have any desire right now to take on the role of the avatar. She's just focused on learning bending to kill and take revenge against Jianzhu. And we see her kind of noticing that she needs the training because she tries to earthbend the Avatar relic, but ends up destroying it and turning it into dust. So, that's a kind of symbolic thing because it also says, she's destroyed the only kind of item she has that like Kelsang gave to her. So, short chapter, but what are your thoughts on chapter 12?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a interesting chapter just because of, how, Kyoshi's just sort of, I guess sort of reflecting on sort of the immediate sort of decision that she sort of had and just sort of, finding her new sort of purpose as, the chapters sort of labeled her sort of decision here. And yeah, no, I mean, I think it's always interesting to see, I guess, sort of the initial sort of motivations of characters after such a traumatic sort of experience here, and to see her sort of, try to figure this out with sort of Rangi and just sort of seeing their sort of initial dynamic to dealing with all this change, and especially Rangi just sort of with her sort of, way of sort of, I guess, sort of reacting to things, which is, sometimes, pretty direct as you would think sort of a firebender would have, as well as just sort of trying to sort of, see a way around sort of the situation. But, knowing how Jianzhu sort of his influences just sort of really, really sort of widespread, it definitely, it's interesting, the whole book sort of just goes over the sort of scope of his sort of like empires, and just sort of how much influence he really sort of has, which I guess is just sort of a interesting note of the times in general in the Avatar world, as this is sort of explained later on throughout these chapters.
But yeah, chapter 13 is called Adaptation, and this is our first sort of Jianzhu focused chapter, since his kind of turn out to be the sort of antagonist of the story. And what we get here is basically he makes his way back to Yokoya. It's obviously long since Kyoshi has left. He has to find out, yes, Kyoshi left in a panic. He meets up with Heiran, and specifically, this is the key, I suppose, to a lot of what's going on. When it comes to Heiran, he just tells her that basically Yun and Kelsang were like kind of taken in an accident with a spirit. He lies about the important details, but tells her, Kyoshi is the Avatar, but Yun and Kelsang are gone, and she hates me for kind of bringing this situation to kind of pass in a way. So he keeps himself from being the villain to her, and she actually takes it fairly calmly. They do great lengths to explain that anyone else will be furious upon hearing that. She does hit him, but she quickly calms down and is immediately like, okay, what is your support system like? Are you going to suffer greatly because of this, or what? And he basically, like, after he settles down, realizes that, look, they're eventually, even if they find Kyoshi, going to have to reveal that, okay, we made a mistake with Yun, but once we have Kyoshi, that can be sorted out. And so he finally gets his thoughts back on track and decides that, okay, the first step to finding Kyoshi is just to locate her. They bring up the whole fact of, like, once they find out Rangi is also left with her, it creates a huge problem because Heiran's like, oh, my daughter's like a master of like evasion. Like it's going to be such a struggle to find her. So this is where Jianzhu has Heiran send out a letter to Professor Shaw, who is the head of zoology at Ba Sing Se University, and he wants a sort of cultural exchange of animals between the Earth Kingdom and the Fire Nation. He notes they're specifically cuddly animals, and when Heiran asks what animals these are, he says it's Shearshu that he wants. So that's a really interesting one here. Obviously, like for us as veteran Avatar fans, we know exactly what they mean here, what they're going for here, and it shows the cleverness of Jianzhu of going straight for the ultimate trackers. But it's a nice reference to get that in as well. They are kind of Earth Kingdom based, and it's nice to get that reference, and as well as the whole Ba Sing Se University. It's around at this point in time. We see the zoology department this time. So what were your thoughts on this Jianzhu focused chapter here?
Yeah, overall, I think it's definitely interesting to get sort of, I guess, a perspective on Jianzhu and sort of how he, plots and schemes. I think we definitely get a good feel for it in general up until this point, but now you can see how he's trying to sort of, backtrack everything that he has sort of done, and the whole idea of him sort of figuring out how to sort of track Kyoshi down with the sort of share shoes, which I think that's definitely a cool thing to sort of bring into the book in general. I mean, what what other Avatar animal would be sort of like the best that we know of, at least for tracking down people. So to hear how they sort of I don't know, it's interesting how they sort of describe them sort of in the beginning, which I think if you know enough about them, that pretty much gives it away. And then sort of when you see the name finally revealed, I think it's definitely pretty cool. It's definitely a nice sort of callback to the series. So I think something that we've mentioned before is just how well they do in sort of integrating the whole sort of Avatar universe into the book here. But no, I think it's definitely interesting to see. At least it seems like he still has some hope despite everything that sort of happened. Which I think even at this point, most people would say that like there's no way you're really going to get back into Kyoshi's sort of good graces. But he still seems to think that he can. Maybe just because of his sort of age and what he's done in the past. But even now, it seems like he thinks things can sort of work out. Despite even if she did come back, she would probably reveal everything that really happened, which would of course make things even worse.
Yeah, and in the middle of all this, I like that kind of Heyran has a moment of like, because she gets straight down to business of sort of almost like plotting and scheming with him as well about the politics of all this, but has like a moment of like, what are we doing here? Like our best friend just died. Like why are we scheming about the Avatar and the power that's related to that? And Jonju's response is just like, we've grown old and become responsible, and that's his answer to it. So we see his sort of web of lies begin to start up of like he's told this person this much of the story, this person that much of the story. It's all going to become a little bit too much at some point. But anyway, we move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 14, which is called the Introduction, and this is a very important chapter because it's it's the start of really the next stage of the journey. It's okay, where have Kyoshi and Rangi decided to go? What is the path to finding Kyoshi some teachers? And they decide it's time to kind of unearth Kyoshi's past, go into that and use the support structure that her parents have. So we obviously found out what was in the box. Now we found out sort of what's in the journal as well. So they come to Chameleon Bay here, so a place we've heard before, but we go to a specific place here, Madame Kiji's tea house, and immediately they go in and Kyoshi starts talking like she's this like veteran Dao Fei. She's like bringing up these codes and stuff like that. She sits in a specific spot, and they go through a whole kind of back and forth. It feels kind of Ordered White Lotus-y here, but it's more sort of a Dao Fei code type thing. It's actually pretty interesting. He's basically just asked, what do you want to drink, and they go back and forth on it. She says, jasmine picked in fall, scented at noon, and steeped at a boil. His response is, we have every color blossom known to man and spirit. And she just says, red and white will suffice. And this is what gets the crew, the Dao Fei crew, to kind of come in, and we get to meet these characters here. But it's a nice one of like seeing Kyoshi, the fact that she has read all this stuff. As much as she hates that journal and stuff like that, she knows a lot about her past, and does remember a lot. So it is interesting just how much she's kept from like the reader as well as everyone else, as we kind of get into this whole Dao Fei thing. So I suppose just before we get into the characters, what are your thoughts on this being the kind of direction that the main character's journey takes to the getting involved with the Dao Fei?
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess it sort of makes sense. They have to sort of like go out of the system and sort of, figure out how she's going to get any way, better than what she currently is. And, this seems like, it just, it's, what a coincidence that she happens to have this sort of, lineage and this sort of journal that sort of, helps her, directly, or at least she thinks it helps her directly get into this sort of world. So, I guess it's sort of funny how these things sort of work out and how they sort of play out that, this is, what she once thought was like the worst thing ever, is something that, could potentially sort of help her going forward.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, we do get to meet what is effectively revealed to be her parents' old Dao Fei crew. So this is where we get introduced to the idea of Kyoshi's parents are named Jesa and Hark. So that's Jesa for her mother and Hark, Hark, for her father. And we get revealed that they ran this Dao Fei group here, which is called the Flying Opera Company. I think the name is revealed in the next chapter, but that's what it is here. So Kyoshi's going to get the aid of her mother's old crew here to get the Dao Fei network basically going for her. So the people she runs into here are Lek, Kirima, Wong, and Lao Ge. I'm not really sure about the pronunciation on that, but Lao space Ge. So I think we'll take a time here just to go through these characters, because these become our new sort of main characters. With Yun gone, Kelsang gone, these are our new sort of, secondary characters for most of the book. So let's start with Lek, who is, they say here, he's from the Si Wong tribe. He's an earthbender, of course. And describe, he wears all the wrappings and stuff like that. So, he's a sandbender, but they get across the idea that he is more of a direct earthbender, though I think there's a sand kind of element with some of the techniques that we get introduced to. He's obviously the youngest member of the crew, but he actually is also sort of kind of the face, and he sort of acts like the leader, because he's the one referencing most of the Dao Fei stuff and speaking to Kyoshi most of the time. But what are your thoughts on Lek as a character?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting just to sort of get introduced to him, I guess, initially here, and him being sort of the youngest. But, as you sort of continue to learn later on, he's one of the more sort of devoted to sort of everything that sort of happened with him sort of being the Dao Fei. And it's nice when you do actually get his sort of backstory. But yeah, no, I think it's definitely interesting just sort of having his sort of lineage and learning about his sort of abilities, and sort of him having, I guess, sort of, the whole sort of outfit. I guess if you know the show, you can sort of pretty well sort of imagine what his sort of like attire is, which to me, in sort of my mind, sort of stands out as being, something different that you wouldn't normally see. So, he would be, I would think he would be pretty unique, even despite, sort of this group being sort of, just sort of different on their own, especially sort of being benders, as sort of learn later on. But no, I think it's, it's definitely interesting just to see this another sort of younger character that's part of this group now.
Yeah, one of our other Earth characters is Wong, or full name, like what, Flitting Sparrowkeet Wong, I think is the full name that they give him. They describe him as being like this huge guy, like he's like big both in height and in width, but they describe about all of them, they're super light on their feet and agile, which we get revealed later on is because they all sort of have theater training, because that's sort of part of the gimmick of the group. So he's an earthbender, and he seems to be more of the kind of theater focused guy, in that like he's the one who's going to teach Kyoshi how to use the fans properly. He seems to sort of be an expert about, like, at least her mother's style with the fans and stuff like that. I think, remembering like the book, he's kind of the member of the team who sort of stands out the least, but he is still interesting, because they do give him the whole sort of, he's the fan teacher, he's the one who teaches Kyoshi how to use it. But that's really about most of kind of all I really remember with the character. So of this group, which is overall very, very interesting, he probably stands out the least. But what are your thoughts on Wong?
Yeah, no, I think your point of him sort of standing out the least is probably pretty accurate, as far as like characters that we get sort of like little bits and pieces of their history and sort of things that they have sort of done in the past. I think he's one that doesn't share like a personal sort of like story when they were talking all together later on in a couple later chapters. But I think he's still pretty interesting, just because like you mentioned, sort of his size and his girth. Like she compares him to sort of Kel Sang, so it's interesting to sort of get that sort of one-to-one sort of comparison there, as far as knowing the size of Kel Sang, and sort of the fact that he does have the most sort of operatic sort of like training or theater training as far as the group goes. I mean, they all sort of have it, that's sort of their sort of like thing that they have, but just the fact that that's not something that you would particularly think of Earthbender having, especially one of his sort of size. So I think it's definitely interesting. You do get I think most of what you get out of him is usually from his one-to-ones with Kyoshi, and their sort of like training that they have once they get to that point throughout the series, throughout the book. So I don't know, he's definitely interesting overall.
Mm-hmm. Next up is Kirima, who is the waterbender of the group, and yeah, she's interesting in that she's she's kind of a little bit more talkative in terms of like getting kind of interesting scenes with like Kyoshi and Rangi because they some of the character dynamics that go on, and it's interesting with her because she is like the only sort of non-earthbender kind of in the group, and so she's had to like adapt her waterbending style to take on some of the special techniques of the group overall. And in many ways is kind of like the most kind of personal member of the group in a way, would a lot of them be, in that she kind of you sort of say she's the leader of kind of the group in a way, because she does get a lot of the kind of talking scenes, at least until sort of Kyoshi kind of takes over. I definitely like her character a lot, with where they go with her. But your thoughts on Kirima?
You know, I think she's definitely interesting. Like you said, she is more personable. She definitely, shares a bit more and sort of has, a lot of just conversations in general with Kyoshi and even Rangi, and just in general, she seems to be the one that sort of explains things. I mean, I think it's interesting there. The group's dynamic overall is interesting, just as far as who leads at what point in time and who has the most sort of say. She definitely has I guess a lot of the history of the group as far as how things sort of like used to be versus how things are sort of now. So I think she's definitely a cool one, just in the fact that she is more sort of conversational overall.
And then finally we have Lao J. Again, the pronunciation I'm not sure about, but I suppose we'll save a lot of the details with him until later, because lots is revealed about him in some of I think two of the chapters we're going to discuss. But for now, all we need to know about him is just that he's very old. He initially comes across as being sort of disheveled, just this drunken old man, who's not particularly impressive. But very quickly you'll begin to realize that he's almost like the most important member of the group, because he is the oldest. He has like the most history to him, and then some of the stuff we're going to learn about him is kind of answers some of the most important questions in the book. Yeah, like I said, he's an earthbender, and we'll get, I think in the next chapter actually, get introduced to his unique style of bending. So yeah, he starts off as being kind of like, oh, who's the old guy that's with them, but he quickly becomes like, yeah, he's kind of like the most interesting character in a way in the book, kind of. But what are your thoughts on Lao Ji, or how do you pronounce his name, I suppose, first of all?
Yeah, no, I say Lao G, but I'm sure someone will know the correct pronunciation. But I think overall, I mean, any sort of like, I think this is just one of those things in the Avatar world. Any sort of like older character who seems to not be important, which not just Avatar, but a lot of stories in general, is always turns out to be the one that's sort of like most interesting, which I think it doesn't take long for you to sort of realize that he's, different than he sort of appears. I think as soon as he has to sort of like take into battle, and they sort of just like leave him at the wayside, just being like, oh yeah, he'll be, he'll catch up somehow. I think it's, you see how, how interesting that he can be. So yeah, no, I think he probably is, maybe the most interesting sort of character sort of out of the group that we currently see, just because of, his sort of history.
hmm So yeah, the dynamic here is, of course, Kyoshi goes in here. She's found the group, and when she kind of gets in, she quickly finds out they've really fallen from grace. They've gone from having a whole support network in multiple places across the Earth Kingdom to now it's just them. That's their group. They're here. They're sort of stuck in this very kind of town here in Chameleon Bay. They're based in the tea shop. That's it. The entire structure's gone, and before they can really decide on anything, that's when the police show up and they have to kind of escape, which is the next chapter. But I suppose it's important to bring up as well at this point in time the dynamic with kind of Kyoshi and Rangi is sort of beginning to develop a little bit of tension, because Kyoshi's acting very aggressively ever since the thing with Jianzhu has happened and her devotion to kill him. Her approach in dealing with people has been like kind of think things through later on, just act in the moment, be very, very aggressive, and Rangi's kind of growing worried about it. For Kyoshi herself, she's meant to be the Avatar as well, but is doing things in a very different way, and she's very, very worried. And we'll get lots of scenes like this of just Rangi reacting to Kyoshi's decisions, and it'll all come to a head in a couple of chapters' time. But what were your thoughts on this sort of simmering dynamic between Kyoshi and Rangi over these kind of couple of chapters here?
Yeah, no, this is definitely sort of, you can see, just sort of whole relationship dynamic that they have. I think it, really starts to change at this point. Once she comes to sort of realize that, she's the Avatar, and that, Kyoshi has this sort of, currently one track sort of like vengeance, sort of mindset. It definitely sort of, worries her friend for sure, and sort of how she's going about dealing all with this. And even from like the beginning of the chapter to the end of it, they sort of have these sort of like half conversations, half sort of like arguments, and then they sort of have to like put them on pause, to sort of do whatever the current sort of situation that they sort of have here. So they definitely go back and forth about that a whole bunch of times here. Like even in the beginning, they have the whole sort of idea of sort of like Rengi just sort of talking about sort of like the Fire Nation and how sort of good it is, and how it's not really like perfect as you sort of would think when she's sort of comparing it to where they currently are in the Earth Kingdom. And then she just mentions how maybe one day the Fire Nation could be different. So it's interesting how they sort of throw those sort of different things in about just sort of the state of the Avatar world at that point, and considering how we know how it turns out later on with the war and everything else. It's interesting to see these sort of mentions of things.
Yeah, they get that across. Yeah, that the Fire Nation is prosperous, but not super prosperous at this point in time. But basically, like I suppose, what 250-ish years from this point, we'll
Hmm.
see Sozin go too far with thinking they're so prosperous, everyone should have it, and that's a nice little reference here because I think very clearly that's what the author was going for there. You're meant to think about like, oh, this is what's going to happen when they get too prosperous. And yeah, just the idea that like the location that they're in outside of the tea shop is an extremely poor area. Like there's people just sleeping in these kind of worn out tents, and like everyone looks like they're suffering from malnutrition and so on. And there's a little bit of a conversation about like Rangi. I think this is where Rangi reveals that like she knows about Kyoshi's like history prior to being like hired at the mansion as well. That she
Hmm.
kind of found out about it from Wee at the back at the mansion, and is kind of so apologetic about kind of everything that happens here. And it's, I think part of the dynamic here is kind of Rangi kind of being confused about like how she's meant to be with Kyoshi as the avatar versus how she is with Kyoshi as the person, and kind of like really struggling to deal with both of them, in that she now sort of has to accept Kyoshi's avatar orders, but also wants to be really aggressive about helping Kyoshi to change, like in the earlier chapters and so on. So it's a really good dynamic, is the main thing to say. Um, Next up, chapter 15, Escape. Uh, Basically, two sections in this chapter. One is the escape action scene. Second half is a very interesting conversation with Lao Ji. But the escape scene is really cool because it's the contrast between everyone else in Kyoshi and how they escape from the police who arrive. The Flying Opera Company reveal their sort of special bending agility techniques here. The Earthbenders have this technique called dust stepping, which is described as basically they jump into the air and then subtly bend the tiniest pillar of earth under their foot that lasts just long enough for them to do a step in the middle of air. Then it falls into dust away like they've never done anything. So it looks like, if you're not paying attention, like they're just walking on air, but it's this subtle, perfect. It's the exact opposite of the style of bending Kyoshi's doing right now. Style of earth bending, brand new sort of technique we've never really heard about before. And then Kirima has a water bending version of this called mist stepping, where she effectively does the same thing of like temporarily having a little bit of water just under her feet, so she can stand on it just enough to get a step up. Rangi notices them doing this and does a fire version of this, which is, I suppose, just a very basic version of the sort of fire flying technique we'll see later on, but this is more of just a jump assist type move. And while all this is going on, Kyoshi's just running through walls, basically. They literally describe her as just at some point deciding, I have to get to Peng Peng, I'll just run through every wall that I can, and she just starts smashing stuff. So the contrast of styles here is pretty good. While Lao Ji is just, they leave him to do most of the fighting, and they kind of leave him behind. They're like, he'll catch up. And the one thing they reveal about his style is that he's basically doing the sort of crazy drunk style of fighting, assisted by earthbending. So he like falls over completely to the side, but then has like an earth pillar come up to like right himself, and he'll just he has this kind of unique angles that he takes because he just like falls all over the place and has the earth bending do a lot of the movement for him. So very, very cool, unique styles of bending going on here. But what were your thoughts on this kind of action sequence and a lot of new techniques?
Yeah, no, I think this is definitely one of the cooler scenes just to see how they, how to describe this sort of new technique that we haven't really seen in the series. I think it's probably, I'm sure it's been mentioned before, just sort of the idea of doing this in general. But the fact that they're able to do this so sort of effortlessly, and Rangi, she's just really good, so she can figure out how to do her own sort of like modified version of this. And Kyoshi, she just she's just not up to that level. She really, like we've mentioned before, she really doesn't have any sort of serious sort of like earthbending training at all. And just with her current sort of like weakness that she has, is just that's obviously something that's quite and literally above sort of her ability to do it. But the idea of getting her just sort of blown through walls and shops and houses and whatever else is sort of in her way, and just sort of I guess figuring out that she can at least sort of like almost like sort of like intuitively sort of like bend stuff away from her in order to sort of get through all of this sort of like stuff in her way without hurting herself at all. I think is it's a cool idea of seeing how this would actually work. It definitely would be a cool thing to see if someone were to ever sort of like create this visually. But no, I think they definitely do a good job of describing this whole sort of scene as they sort of jumping from rooftops and sort of getting to the outskirts of the city.
Yeah, and they also describe like Kyoshi only knows where to go because like Rangi is sending up like fire signals into the air to like direct Kyoshi's like mad charge to the walls and stuff like that. So they arrive at Peng Peng. The whole crew, especially Lek, have a really like impressed reaction upon seeing a sky bison, and this is where they reveal like more about kind of Kyoshi's mother. This is like the big reveal here type thing. So first of all, they reveal the group used to have a sky bison. Long Yan, I think, is the name that they describe it as, but it kind of ran off at some point. They described that it was Jace's bison, so everyone's like, wait, this is the one thing that Rangi hasn't been informed about just yet. Wait, does this mean what I think it means? And Kyoshi's like, okay, yeah, sorry, Rangi, I'm going to have to reveal the third, like, amazing reveal about my past. Sorry about this. Yeah, my mother was an airbender. I'm half air nomad. And like everyone is just like, what? Because of this reaction, and it's revealed that she was born in the Eastern Air Temple. She met Kyoshi's father, who was a kind of, they kind of described like kind of low time Dao Fei, and they started running schemes together. And she just kind of fell in love. They kind of had Kyoshi. Along the way, she covered over her Master Airbender tattoos with serpent tattoos that connects a couple of dots there as well. And they also described that a lot of the reason why Kyoshi wasn't able to be found when she was younger because she was obviously traveling with her parents. That's why the Earth geomancy method never worked, because she was always traveling. By the time anyone got out to those locations, they were gone. That explains all those place names from like the first chapter. And yeah, this is where the Flying Opera Company is mentioned, that like they're back on track basically again. Yeah, like great reveals at this point. Here, I really like this reveal. I think this is the one thing I've seen people bring up a lot about this book in terms of like their reaction to finishing it for the first time, and like one of the big reveals that they didn't expect is like Kyoshi's mother is an airbender, and just the idea of an airbender character who went down a different path than what we expect, because all of them are monks, and like so many of them are like the same character kind of type thing. There's not that many different arcs for an airbender character, but here we get one. So what are your thoughts on the reveals about Kyoshi's mother Jasa here?
Yeah, no, I think that definitely was a cool one to get. I guess I don't know. I don't know if I was super surprised about it, but I think it's definitely a really sort of cool one just to sort of get that was sort of like her mother. She's half air nomad. I mean, I think the idea of just seeing an airbender sort of outside the scope of the temples, I think is definitely sort of unique. But it seems like all all of the airbenders that do something, somewhat interesting seem to have to go outside of, the sort of air temple sort of thing, or they're sort of, they're sort of like, almost like renegade sort of air nomads because they do something different or they think differently than, how most air nomads usually act. I mean, I think, we've definitely have gotten that, sort of idea from Kel saying, despite, sort of him, having a lot of the trappings of a normal sort of, like airbender or airbending master, he definitely, especially with his past, that we learn about, he's done things that, definitely don't sit right with the air nomads for sure. So, those are the types that seem to do something interesting. And I guess, it's interesting just because her mother, I mean, just the idea of sort of doing these sort of tricks and sort of, I don't know, it almost seems like something that an airbender would sort of do, minus the whole sort of like, monetary sort of, worldly possession thing. That's the thing that definitely, stands out from what we know of about air nomad culture. But no, I think it's definitely a cool reveal here, and just to see, Rangi's sort of reaction to it, I think, is really interesting because it's just, especially in this world, I think if you're sort of part of it, it's something that's just it's so out there. It's like, they break it down really well here as far as her just sort of having her whole sort of like world sort of like turned upside down as far as what she thought, to sort of be fundamentally true. And I don't know, it makes me sort of wonder. I mean, they mentioned that she covered up her sort of tattoos, but, I guess, the Dalfe, maybe because they're so sort of like underground, and unless you really sort of do something sort of above ground, you generally just sort of go unnoticed, or it just seems like that's how the Earth Kingdom is sort of set up. So maybe she was really able to sort of, go under the radar of the whole rest of the world, despite having this sort of ability that, you would think would be pretty unique, especially with the air bison, which I'm guessing they probably kept that pretty under wraps for the most part, which it seems like they sort of mentioned that later on as we get towards, them talking about Ping Ping. So no, it definitely is a cool reveal here, and something that definitely adds another element to the show overall.
Yeah, it connects a lot of dots in that. Like it's interesting that like it's just this cool thing of like Kyoshi, her father figure, is like an air nomad, but now her mother was actually an air nomad as well, so she had like a familiarity already, kind of with kind of some aspects of air nomad culture and stuff like that. It's nice just connecting the dots, and that I think chapter 7, the iceberg and the encounter with that guy who basically described her mother. This chapter explains all of that stuff completely. So there's so many like dots connected here. But last thing in this chapter is Kyoshi talking to Lao Ji. She goes over to him on his own, and she says that I know who you are. After seeing you fight so many men at once, it became clear you're Tigwai the Immortal. And he's like, oh, you probably found a description of me in Jace's journal. Long white hair, great dancer, devastatingly handsome. And it says, I didn't have that much detail. It said you were under an underworld legend rumored to be 200 years old, but that's obviously a tall tale. Of course, I'm a man, not a spirit after all. And they also describe here that Tigwai fights with a crutch, and that's how she recognized that it was him. And he calls himself as well, like Immortal Tigwai. And then she goes on to explain that also my mother was convinced that you were also Tigwai the Assassin, that on any mission that they went on, he would always leave for a day or two and come back, and they'd quickly find out someone of an important standing has been killed, including at one point the 40th Earth King. So this guy is an assassin, potentially 200 years old. This is answering a lot of questions already, but obviously a lot of the specifics we'll get into later on. But she immediately asks, like, to basically be thought by him. She wants to learn how to kill people, and specifically notes that she wants to be able to sort of kill people and have it just be normal. She describes basically she wants to be able to kill people in the same way that John Zhu was so composed as he killed Yoon and Kelsang. And he agrees, as long as she keep his secret that he's an assassin from the rest of the group, and he will keep her secret safe as well. So very clear that he is aware that she's the Avatar. When he first came over, also he said something about her spirit, that like her spirit is loud, so there's a sense of energy sensing, kind of he'll go into like chakras later on as well. So some Guru Patik vibes to him, but a very, very, very different character than Guru Patik, but similar techniques and kind of ideals on some things. But what are your thoughts on these reveals about Laoji or Tiguai?
Yeah, no, I think Lao Ji's sort of reveal here, I think is definitely interesting. The whole sort of, mention Guru Pratik, I think is definitely a good idea as far as just sort of his, his spiritualness that he sort of has to him, even if it's, the way that he goes about sort of using it is definitely, completely sort of opposite of sort of what we've seen in the past with his sort of, supposed sort of assassination attempts that he's been doing. But no, I think it's definitely interesting just to see, a character who's essentially going to be more of her sort of like, spiritual sort of teacher here, even if he is on sort of the wrong side of the law. He definitely, if he's been around as long as, people sort of think he has been, and he's, done the things that he has done, he would be, a good teacher for what Kyoshi thinks that she wants to learn at this point in time. So the fact that she's able to sort of figure that out and sort of make a deal to sort of get this training in some sort of fashion sort of helps her current sort of cause. It'll be interesting to see how she takes this in the later chapters, and just in the future in general, just sort of this ability that he's seemingly going to be teaching her.
Yeah, because like he doesn't even teach her earthbending. She's literally just going to him for assassination training, the ideals of like the mindset to kill people without like ruining yourself type thing. So next up is chapter 16, which is called The Agreement. This is another kind of shorter chapter. It starts off with Rangi actually starting to train Kyoshi in firebending. It's kind of what you expect. Rangi sort of taking a little bit of revenge on Kyoshi for all of the wild reveals of the previous days, and putting her through some very tough training of horse stance and stuff like that. Here, she specifically does the kind of Jong thing of like, okay, no, it's the start of it's the start of training. No fire. Kyoshi tries to do fire, but just makes smoke, and so on. A lot of other stuff happens as well, but we're just starting to get those dynamics between the characters. We have a few scenes of Lek here, as it's explained that he idolized Kyoshi's parents, because like they basically explain very quickly like an idea of his backstory, that like the person closest to him, he lost them, and then he was sort of taken in by Kyoshi's parents, and they sort of raised him. And it creates a bit of tension between Lek and Kyoshi, because Kyoshi hates her parents for abandoning her, but Lek sees it as the opposite of like he was abandoned and they took him in. So Kyoshi's sort of jealous of Lek for having her parents, and then Lek hates the fact that Kyoshi always insults her parents, and that in the previous chapters, when we found out that her parents are dead, they died of fever, she tries to act like she doesn't care at all, but there's like a sense that there's some level of caring, but ultimately she's relieved that they're not around anymore. So what are your thoughts on this firebending sequence with Rangi, and then the sort of Lek Kyoshi dynamic about her parents?
Yeah, no, I think that the dynamic that they have and going forward, and how that eventually sort of gets, resolved to some degree, I think is interesting, just because, it's the same sort of people, but because of, different situations, they have, a completely different viewpoint on sort of these maternal, paternal sort of figures that they have here. So it's definitely interesting to see how that gets played out and how that gets developed, later on throughout the whole sort of series here. But I think, this one is it's good to see how, I guess, getting a better sort of dynamic of our sort of characters here, getting to see, sort of Kyoshi sort of, start to request things like learning specific techniques, and how that sort of, creates sort of another sort of rift, or, current, rift in the group, as far as, what they're willing to share versus what they're not willing to share, and just sort of, Kyoshi's, starting to get sort of, I guess sort of a better idea of where she wants to go, or what she, currently wants to do. So I think this is a good, point of her sort of beginning that sort of journey here.
Yeah, so the title of the chapter, The Agreement, refers to the fact that if Kyoshi wants to start her training, they'll only agree to train her if she takes the oaths and swears the codes of the Dao Fei. Kyoshi agrees, even though Rangi's protesting a lot, because from Rangi's point of view, the Avatar can't be a Dao Fei. That goes against everything Rangi knows. That is not the way it's meant to be. And Kyoshi thinks it through, but ultimately accepts it, that this is what she needs right now, and she's going ahead with it. We get a little reference here. This is where Wong reveals that he's sort of a master of the fans. He shows Kyoshi how to use them properly. This is where she sort of gets some of the agreement with that training going. Little mention here that the theater aspect of the group is coming from Kyoshi's father's side of things. They mention that it goes back to like a theater group in Ba Sing Se. Basically, that's why the group has like a history of their kind of cover wherever they go, is that they are like a theater troupe, and they do these shows that show off the theater and like dancing and stuff like that. So that's chapter 16. I don't really remember. Like, they don't really say that much about Kyoshi's father throughout the book. What do you remember about what specifically is said about Hark, Kyoshi's father?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I mean, the whole story about sort of the group's sort of origins is probably the most sort of thing that I remember about, her father, which is, I don't know. I think that's interesting considering he is sort of like the Earth Kingdom sort of connection that she sort of has here, but that doesn't really get into play here other than just sort of, I guess, sort of her inheritance from him, maybe, just sort of her ability. I don't know. It would be interesting just to see sort of what his, main sort of contribution was to the group overall, other than sort of the theater aspect.
Yeah, from what I remember, the one thing that describes that one of Kyoshi's nightmares is that she remembers what like her mother and father look like, but she specifically describes the makeup as being like something she associates with her father rather than her mother. So so the face paint is kind of like almost the father's thing more so than Jace's. And then it's this kind of theater connection, and then just the fact that he is the Dao Fei originally, and then he gets Jace involved in this. But I don't remember that much. Like, did they even confirm that he's an Earthbender?
That's a good question. I think I just pretty much assumed that because he's from the Earth Kingdom. But yeah, no, that's a good point.
Yeah, again, like this is some of the stuff, like some of the later chapters I have to reread again and stuff like that. They might say something about it, but I can't obviously remember anything at the moment. Chapter 17 is called Obligations, so this is another John Zhu chapter, and it's a pretty interesting one. We start to see some of the problems and some more of the scheming here. So what happens here is that Liu Beifong has invited the Avatar to a party. He still thinks Yun is the Avatar, and immediately this causes problems for Jianzhu because he can't immediately bring up the Avatar because he knows the Avatar is dead, and then Kyoshi, who's the actual Avatar, hates him. We then get introduced to effectively one of Jianzhu's political rivals, Chamberlain Hui, who he really doesn't like. This is, I suppose, his biggest rival, the guy who has just as many sort of connections as him, and is constantly trying to take him down. And basically, they go to this party, Jianzhu and Heiran, and we get a few interesting things here, in that it's not all about just get Kyoshi, get Kyoshi, get Kyoshi. He's still trying to do his usual role of still trying to do these sort of Avatar negotiations with the Avatar out of the way. So here he tries to negotiate a deal to get funding for more of a Southern Water Tribe navy, so that in the absence of Tagaka, the Southern Water Tribe can kind of take control of like their own seas, and that will sort of help the Water Tribe improve and stuff like that. He's honestly trying to make them a better nation through this deal here he's trying to broker with Liu Beifong, of course the wealth of the Beifong family. And they basically present the idea that Hui just jumps in and basically steps all over this deal, points out that like this is why this deal shouldn't happen, and Jianzhu's reaction is like he broke down that deal for no reason. Like he just didn't want the Water Tribe to get better, and I think it helps to sort of still humanize Jianzhu even after his kind of heel turn in all of this, that he's still trying to do the thing he set out to do from the start. He still wants to devote himself to the Avatar and be there at the side of the Avatar at these negotiations, and he still has good intentions in so many ways. It's just the acts he's committed are too far in all of this. But what are your thoughts on kind of Jianzhu in this chapter? Because it's not just all scheming villain here. There is still Jianzhu from the early chapters when we still kind of liked him.
Yeah, no, I think, there definitely are aspects of him that are sort of positive. I mean, even just sort of like getting to this sort of party, he mentions sort of the whole idea of just sort of like paving off, sort of all the roads, which I guess is somewhat purpose, just because he has to sort of travel them apparently. But, he definitely, he still has, I guess, sort of a larger goal in mind of just sort of making the world overall sort of a better place. And doing that, he knows that he needs sort of the avatar, so that's sort of why he's so sort of focused on sort of getting the avatar onto his side here. But yeah, no, the whole idea of sort of him sort of trying to help up the Southern Water Tribe, and seeing that whole sort of idea sort of just fall to the wayside because Chamberlain sort of just seems to just sort of wants to be antagonistic to everything that sort of Jianzhu is sort of doing here without any, at least as far as we're sort of told at this point, any sort of like real sort of reason here. So, that's just a nice sort of bit, sort of thrown in there just because we know, how the Southern Water Tribe is overall. So, maybe if they did get this loan, maybe they would have done better when the war came later on. Maybe not. But it's interesting just to see how, that could have worked here. But no, there definitely is sort of a lot of just sort of political sort of doings in here. I think that's just sort of a key component of Jianzhu's sort of character, and you can see him sort of this chapter I think does a good idea of sort of his sort of thought process of what lies to sort of tell who and sort of when to tell them, and how sort of like Hiran isn't even sort of up to date on everything that he sort of says in this, so it catches her sort of off guard, but he's able to sort of use that to his sort of advantage in this sort of situation here. And of course he has to explain that later on. He's definitely, he definitely seems like he's very well versed in sort of the political sphere of things. I mean, they make mention of him sort of being sort of the brains of the Avatar group when they were all sort of together, so you definitely see that coming into play here, and him at least thinking that he can do sort of the right thing, or thinking that this will all sort of work out for him, although it definitely doesn't seem like that's going to be something that's going to work out for him.
Yeah, so towards the end of the chapter he realizes that he has to say something about where the Avatar is. It can't just be, oh, the Avatar is going to turn up at some point. So he decides that the best way to help his lie work and everyone believe it, and it's not just Jianzhu lying to get what he wants, is for effectively his biggest rival to reveal what seems to be a bad thing, but it's actually like Jianzhu's lie. So he speaks to Hui in private and basically says, "Oh, I'm sorry. Like I've actually lost the Avatar. The Avatar's not speaking to me because we had an argument. He's ran off with Kelsang. It's a real problem. What are we meant to do?" So Hui believes this completely because it's a negative thing about his biggest rival. So he then goes and says like, okay, I'll take charge of this situation. I'll deal with, at this party, telling Liu Beifong that why the Avatar isn't going to show up. And Hui kind of feels like by putting Jianzhu down, he's going to get one over on him by basically like almost like informing Liu Beifong about what happened. When in reality, this helps Jianzhu sort of stabilize his lie that everyone now believes that the Avatar is doing whatever Hui says he's doing. So the lie that sort of Hui comes up with to explain it away is that, oh, the Avatar's on like a spiritual retreat away from the world for the time being. We can't get in touch with him for a while. He'll come back eventually. And so Jianzhu has sort of manipulated Hui into doing something to help him by taking a slight hit against his rival here politically. So it's a nicely kind of constructed one. I liked how it sort of came together, just like direct politics between two rivals. What were your thoughts on how they kind of accomplished this section of him kind of getting his lies stable with everyone?
Yeah, no, he definitely is like just lies inside of lies inside of lies, just a way that Jianzhu's sort of doing everything. But I guess from his perspective, this seems like getting someone else to tell the lie for you, because they think that they're doing sort of the right thing by them, by their own sort of self-important sort of goals, is sort of how he's sort of playing this sort of situation here. So I don't know, I think it's definitely, I don't know, it's interesting just to see the whole sort of political aspect of just sort of the Avatar in general. I think this book definitely does a different way of showing that than what we've seen before, because that, that wasn't really the purpose during the original series. It was more just sort of like, save the world type of thing. But here you get to see sort of how important the Avatar and having his sort of like favor in general just is to just being able to do sort of like anything of sort of like important in the world. It just, it carries so much sort of weight and authority that, it's just sort of something that you have to sort of have in order to get things done.
Hmm. So yeah, that's chapter 17. Right at the end, we find out that the sure shoes that they kind of asked were actually kind of delivered, so they get them going. Chapter 18 is it's a pretty long chapter, but it's a very eventful, important one. So we change location here. Our group heads to the Taihua mountain range, and specifically this sort of this town that is not really on the map anywhere. It hasn't been mapped yet because it's kind of beyond the mountains. Hujiang. It's the kind of like they say this like the last remaining kind of Daofei town where it's just this is the last holdout where like the abiders, the law abiders haven't got to them yet. And they come here because they're trying to get a score. The flying opera company is back up and running. They need to get money to fund things, and then they'll get Kyoshi's training started. Very quickly, they run into a problem because they meet up with Mok M-O-K, who's the leader of the Autumn Bloom Society, and it turns out that the group owes a favor to Mok because previously he gave medical supplies to Lek after Lek was stung by a buzzard wasp, and they sort of owe like their loyalty to him. So that's why they're all really bowing down to him, like Uncle Mock. That's what they're calling him because he has so much power in this situation here, and it's he tries to intimidate them. This is where you see the rest of the group sort of stepping up, while Rangi and Kyoshi don't really know what's going on. And we see another kind of situation of like the sort of issues between Kyoshi and Rangi coming to light here. Of they see this kind of fighting arena, the Lei Tai arena. They basically describe it as like almost like a wrestling ring with no ropes type thing. It's not quite Earth Rumble, but it's something like that. And there's unarmed fighting, there's weapons fighting that happens in this arena. Basically, any dispute among Daofei, you settle it in the arena. And Kyoshi is immediately kind of turned off at sort of the kind of blood sport nature of this, and this sort of gets her a little bit in trouble with Mok because he doesn't like to see his subordinates kind of not like the kind of look of blood and stuff like that. So this gets Lek hurt. He has his kind of lieutenant cut Lek's hand, and Kyoshi has to sort of stand her ground and watch as like Lek's in pain and just accept it, trying to be tough Kyoshi. And this sort of prompts Rangi to do this kind of thing, which is later revealed to be sort of like really, really irresponsible. But she gets into the Lite arena and fights this guy. She doesn't use her bending. They agree on that beforehand. She nearly wins the fight really early on. She takes a big punch to the face, but kind of counter strikes when the guy comes to finish her off and breaks his leg. It's a pretty brutal end to this fight. And the idea is that she gets them really in good with Mok here because they've seen how impressive Rangi is. So this sort of opens up the door to them after a bit of a shaky start. And Mok is very, very impressed with Rangi and all of this. And so this is where we get the idea of Mok, to fully repay all of the favors, they'll be done after this. He wants their help on this raid, on this they basically describe it as like a mansion that also sort of doubles as a prison, so it's sort of heavily guarded. And one of his allies is being held in there for a very long time. They talk about, I think it's Governor Tay is the name of the guy, and he wants the Flying Opera Company to act as the sort of stealth portion of the attack, where they kind of sneak in around the back and do a lot of the big work, while his guys do the main frontal assault. And that's the immediate plan at the start. But yeah, there's lots more in this chapter, but just on this first part of the chapter, Greg, what are your thoughts on the town?
Yeah, no, I mean, getting the description of the town and how it sort of operates, I think is pretty interesting. It definitely, it shows the vastness of the Earth Kingdom and how this sort of place can, seemingly thrive outside of the normal sort of system here. I mean, I think it's definitely interesting. They make note of how Jianzhu would sort of want to wipe this whole sort of place out, and they even later on mention, how that would be sort of the Avatar's, sort of job to do as well. But I think it's definitely interesting just to see the new dynamic that the Dalfei group here sort of has as sort of being submissive to this person who they're sort of like indebted to, just sort of calling him Uncle Mock, and just sort of, the deference that they sort of have to give him, despite, them probably being able to sort of, handle him without any sort of problem here. But, you definitely get to see sort of the whole sort of, I guess, sort of code aspect of just sort of the Dao Fei, and sort of how they sort of, they're outlaws, but they have this sort of code that they have to sort of abide by themselves. So even though they always mention, they don't want to deal with the abiders and all that sort of stuff, they have this own sort of rules that they have to deal with here. And just to see how this sort of works out here, and just to see, I guess, when Rangi sort of, helps them, sort of unwittingly, even though she has sort of, alternative motives as far as why she's doing this, but just sort of, her being in sort of the battle here and seeing Kyoshi's sort of reaction here, I think they definitely do a good job of describing that. I think it's very, it's definitely, more of a mature sort of part of the story than we've sort of seen before, just with all the sort of fighting and sort of the dealing that's going on behind the scenes here.
Mm-hmm. The bit after this, obviously, they Rangi has helped them get this kind of better deal from Mach here, that they're pretty much done after this one raid on this place. Kyoshi and Rangi then kind of have a one-on-one talk, and this is when like there's a big discussion about the idea of part of the reason Rangi did what she did was, yes, to get what happened, the respect, but it was also to show Kyoshi basically the way she's been feeling up to now about Kyoshi's actions, by performing an action that she feels Kyoshi, along the lines of what Kyoshi's been doing. So putting herself in danger, being super aggressive and not telling anyone. And she reveals here, let me tell you something. I blacked out when I got hit. If I hadn't woken up quickly, the man would have killed me. So it's revealed that this fight, which we thought went fairly easily for Rangi, she was actually in super danger earlier on in it. And Kyoshi kind of goes pretty crazy here upon hearing this. And the point that she's trying to make here, you know what you felt watching me lie on the canvas, that helplessness, that sensation of your anchor being cut loose. That's what I've been feeling watching you every single minute since we left Yokoya. I got on that platform so you could see it from my perspective. I had no idea what else would get through to you. And it's this whole discussion, like it's back and forth. It's pretty intense, and they're arguing, but they're arguing because they kind of care about each other. So, it goes through a lot of places. It's really, really well written, and Rangi gets around to the point of basically just that she's not just here to bodyguard the Avatar. She's here for Kyoshi herself, and she wants everything for Kyoshi. She wants Kyoshi to be happy. They kind of get around to like, I want you to have a palace and like everyone to love you. And Kyoshi says, but I do feel loved. And then it says here, Rangi's beautiful face shone in the reflection. Kyoshi leaned in and kissed her. So this is kind of the moment they've been building up to for a while. There's been a bunch of scenes in the previous chapters of them being pretty close, and Kyoshi being like attracted to Rangi. Like I think earlier on they said when Kyoshi saw Rangi doing the kind of hopping from roof to roof, there was a kind of moment where she liked what she saw and stuff like that. So here we get the first kiss. It is revealed, I think, through the next sequence that it is just like a kiss on the cheek, I think, here. And then Rangi, it initially seems like Rangi pulls away, but then it's just like, you kiss me on the bruised side of my face, please kiss me on the other side. And so, they're effectively a couple now from this point on, but it was a really well done interaction between the two that went from, really heavy emotion, like Rangi was nearly killed, but she feels that Kyoshi's going to get herself killed, and after just sort of almost like having this sort of screaming match with each other, they sort of realize how they actually feel about each other. So I think it's a really well done setup to romance that they waited until like basically like the halfway point of the book, like over the halfway point of the book to get here, but it feels well set up and I think well done. But what are your thoughts on this big Kyoshi Rangi scene?
Yeah, no, I think this was definitely, like you said, was pretty well done. I think, because of all the motions that they've had built up to this moment here, and this sort of being sort of the final straw for Kyoshi to finally get it, into her head how Rangi's been feeling, pretty much this whole sort of time here, even though, from Kyoshi, she's been, pretty focused on just sort of, getting this training, getting into, the good graces with the group so that she can sort of achieve her end sort of goals here and not sort of really thinking about anything else or, the people who are really around her here. I think this definitely, when the emotions are sort of running high here, I think this is definitely, a good point where they sort of bring sort of their whole sort of relationship together here. And like you mentioned, they have had, enough hints earlier on where they just sort of mention how they sort of view each other, not in anything so sort of like detailed or anything that, but just enough so that you can see that they really care about each other and that they have sort of a deeper connection since, it's not like they haven't been together, in some form or fashion as friends for, the last sort of like 7 or however many long years here. So it's not so, sort of out of the blue or anything like that that you can't see them sort of getting together at this point. So I think it's definitely, it definitely worked out pretty well for me as far as how they eventually built up to this moment.
Yeah, like anyone wondering about this book, like because I've had so many questions about it on like YouTube about like Kyoshi's bisexual. Is that addressed in the book? And I have to be like, it is, but I don't want to spoil it for you. But it's really clearly there, and I think it's well done. And I think it's scenes like this that are really good. And even in a chapter or two's time, like there'll be another pretty nice scene. Like it's not a huge focus in the book, in that like romance is it's only in like a handful of chapters. And it doesn't get too much focus outside of like this sort of section here, but it's pretty well done, I think. Um, but yeah, we move on to chapter 19, which is called The Beast. The first section is basically Kirima finding out about their relationship. So she just kind of walks in and finds them kind of like sleeping basically on each other, and she's just kind of like, yeah, it must be nice, just two friends having a close private moment of friendship under the stars. And the two of them quickly get up and are we being open about this? And they just kind of nod to each other, and Kyoshi's like, it's exactly what it looks like. You have a problem? And Kirima says, I'm not the type to give you grief over whom you love. I am, however, going to give you a tremendous amount of grief about romancing within your own brotherhood. That's like doing laundry in the outhouse. It never ends clean. Um, and then Kyoshi's just like, we actually knew each other before we joined this group, and also my parents were a pair. They founded the group. There's no problem here. So it's a nice scene to kind of double down on it here, that it's effectively, I suppose, just this moment, like in the heat of this moment, like as they're discovered, both nodding to each other and like, yeah, we're in a relationship. We're going to be fairly open about it. So I definitely like this moment. Again, they don't really focus too much on like the group talking about their relationship or anything like that, but you see moments where they're a little bit more open about it, like hugging each other with the others around and stuff like that after this point. But what are your thoughts on this initial section of this chapter?
Yeah, no, I think that was pretty cool, just the way that they sort of, had them sort of together in the beginning of the book and just sort of, having that sort of idea of just sort of, I guess, if there was sort of like any sort of Dalfe group that sort of would just sort of, be cool with just sort of relationships in general, despite how, how messed up that can sort of turn out, that this would be sort of the group since, just because of her parents being the ones that sort of ran the group. So I like that they had that sort of like thread line that sort of, continued with the group. I thought that was definitely sort of a nice touch here, and just sort of how, the group overall seems just cool with that in general, which I think is just nice.
Yeah, the rest of this chapter, like it says, has called The Beast. This is the Shirshoos arriving. Um, it's pretty to the point. It's just, they kind of jump into action. Everyone's like, wait, what's going on here? What are these things? No one really knows what they are. They manage to sort of escape it. There's some bending that happens here. And as they get away, it's basically because the Shirshoos have arrived in a Dao Fei town, the entire Dao Fei town comes after the Sheer Shoes. So it allows everyone to get away just because they have so many people, and that this is the exact town that would just immediately turn and attack a Sheer Shoe. Um, so this is where it's revealed that basically she has to tell them why the Sheer Shoes were after her. So she's going to have to reveal to everyone that she's the Avatar here. So she's kept that from them throughout all of this, that she's the Avatar. The specific person that she's planning to take out, now she has to, because she's sort of put them in danger. So I actually don't think there's too much to say about this Sheer Shoe sequence. I in a way like that they don't spend too long on it, and it's just like, you know what the Sheer Shoe are. You've seen the episode where the Sheer Shoe's in it. It's that kind of happening again. They get away. The difference here is obviously that they kind of later reveal that Lao Ji is actually the one to reveal that it was a Sheer Shoe. I ran away the second I saw it coming, and they're all like, "And you didn't tell us? Like, how do you know what it is? That it's like legendary subterranean beast and stuff like that." He talks about how previous Earth kings used them in the past to take out their like political adversaries and stuff like that. You get a slight history lesson on the Sheer Shoes in this as well, but otherwise it's a pretty, using the Sheer Shoes the way you expect them to be used. But do you have any thoughts on the actions section at the end of this chapter?
Yeah, no, I think it is pretty good. I think, for us being fans, we definitely can sort of, we can think of, the share shoe and how it sort of interacts with everything, and sort of, how it sort of, sniffed them out of the group, and just sort of, just the idea of the whole town sort of coming to sort of, I think, the people of the town definitely were sort of, surprised at first. But, after that, it seems like, if there was a town that would, sort of fight back directly against a share shoe, this would be sort of the one town. So you can definitely see the part where, like, they're all trying to, like, shoot it with arrows and stuff. And you do get, like, I guess a bit of bending in this as well. It's definitely more of an action sort of heavy, sort of part of, this sort of chapter, or just the book in general here. I mean, they have like one part where it's able to sort of like tunnel underground and sort of, escape some of the attacks that way. So no, I think, even Kyoshi tries, a bit of bending in this part, despite it not really sort of working out for her, by the end of it. But no, I think it's definitely a cool scene, just, to have a sort of action bit here. So I think if anyone hasn't sort of seen the show, I think it does a pretty good job of describing the share shoe and what its sort of abilities are overall. I know it's interesting knowing, how it is in the show and how it's described here, how it seems like they try to make it seem almost more sort of like, I don't know, more monstrous or more larger than you sort of would think it might be compared to how big it is actually on the show. I mean, it definitely is pretty imposing on the show, but it doesn't seem to be, I don't know, it didn't seem to be as crazy in the show, other than just this ability to track, you wherever you are in the world.
Well, I suppose it's one of those things where, like, it's one of the few animals to sort of get one over a little bit on, like, Appa, which was pretty interesting about it in the first place. Like, I always forget that, like, they are pretty big animals, Shirshu, that like it was like big enough to like sort of be physical with Appa and stuff like that. But obviously it's special things, the tongue, the venom, the paralyzing venom, and the sense of smell are the main things. I think the only other thing to note about this is that we sort of get introduced to Lek's special like ability here in all of this, and that he sort of defends Kyoshi when they first come across the Shirshu by like from a distance, like amazing accuracy, just nailing it in the nose with rocks over and over again. And this explains Lek's nickname he introduced himself by, of like Bullet Lek, Skull Crusher Lek, and stuff like that. It's just like he can throw stones, and it's just completely accurate. The full detail on like how he developed this skill obviously comes in later on with his backstory, but I just like that we get to see that, and the subtle development over the chapters of just Lek and Kyoshi sort of growing a little bit closer, of just he defended her when kind of Mok kind of said something to her, but he got in trouble. He got his like hand cut, and she thanked him for defending him, and it's happened again here. So that just little nice moments like that. Next chapter, chapter 20, the second last one we're going to cover today. The Avatar's Masters is the name. So yeah, pretty much like it says, she reveals that the person she wants to kill is John Zhu. Interestingly, Lao Ji notes him by the name the Architect, which is the same one that Father Glowworm used. So this is obviously his like old nickname prior to getting the Gravedigger nickname, because everyone else then points out, wait, the Gravedigger, that's the guy that you want to take out. Because I suppose from their point of view, the Dao Fei, they see him as the full-on villain. So like she's just announced that like the terror of the Dao Fei is the one that she wants to kill. So they're shocked at this. She then reveals she's the Avatar, but no one believes her. They're all like, yeah, sure, and like, I can do this form of bending or something like that. But they do test it, and so the way they test it is effectively the Milo from Korra method of testing bending by throwing something at Kyoshi. So she throws water at her and says, basically, think fast. Kyoshi instinctively grabs one of the fans and puts her hands up to block herself, and this is where she water bends for the first time here, just inadvertently to defend herself, in the same way that Boomy inadvertently airbent to prove himself. So kind of similar scene, but everyone is stunned at this. Like everyone is just suddenly like, "Whoa, what's going on here?" And Lao Ji is like the only one who's like, "Yep, I knew this already." Um, but yeah, cool little sequence here. What are your thoughts on how she revealed herself as the Avatar to the group?
Yeah, no, I think the whole think fact method is definitely of course from Milo or anywhere else as well. But I think it works well for what they're sort of trying to go here because of course no one's sort of going to believe her. But I think the whole idea of them knowing Jianzhu and sort of his sort of name, I think is an interesting callback just because we know the idea of him being the grave digger from earlier chapters in previous Dalfei that we've sort of encountered. So, the fact that they're using that name here again just sort of, adds more importance to that sort of story and how he sort of got that actual name. And just, the fact that, someone else does know the name, the Architect, I guess that shows you sort of like the age of Lao Ji and just sort of his sort of viewpoint on Jianzhu and just sort of, I don't know, it makes me sort of wonder sort of when he had that name, was he more ish on sort of like the good side of things rather than the bad side of things where he currently sort of is now? I mean, it doesn't seem like his plans were necessarily like the best way of going about them almost regardless of what they were in. I don't know, maybe less so when he was actually working with the Avatar, but I don't know, I think that's definitely an interesting note here, and just to see the whole group's sort of reaction to her sort of being the Avatar and what comes of it, I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah, the reaction of the group is pretty funny because you'd think they'd be like, "Great, we have the Avatar on our side. Let's do stuff. We're gonna get so much done." But they actually have a bit of a meeting, and they're like, "We're gonna drop you off here. We'll do everything we can to like protect like your identity and stuff like that." They're being very like respectful of the Avatar here, and they're like, "We wouldn't want to like sully the reputation of the Avatar. We will silently let you just stay here." And Kyoshi's just kind of like, I think Rangi's kind of shocked as well that they're just being like, "We'll leave you off here." But Kyoshi actually has kind of committed herself here. She wants to help them. They are her group now, effectively. She's sort of loyal to them. She's, I suppose, sticking by the codes and oath that she's sworn, and is going to stick here. She wants them to be the ones to train her, and it's pretty much settled. There's a bit of a discussion back and forth between Kyoshi and Rangi about, should the Avatar be involved in these kind of Dao Fei missions and stuff like that. It's not going to look very good, but Kyoshi just makes the point of like, no one else in the world knows I'm the Avatar. It's not going to affect my reputation because only a handful of people actually know I'm the Avatar, and it's pretty much settled at this point. So I like the loyalty there. After this chapter, they are like officially a group. The full-on training of Kyoshi is actually going to kind of start at this point in time. So it's definitely a nice chapter in that sense. But what are your thoughts on the kind of remainder of this chapter?
Yeah, no, I think I don't know, it's interesting how they sort of go about sort of, we know that the Dalfei have this sort of respect for the Avatar, as has been mentioned earlier in the book. So to see that come into play directly here, I think is, another interesting point, and just sort of, I don't know, just seeing how the Avatar at this current time works in the world, how it holds, so much more sort of reverence than we've seen in sort of like, in sort of like Aang's time, or definitely in Korra's time. I think it's definitely, seems like the older the time, the more sort of respect that it had, just because of its sort of, the abilities that the Avatar has, and just sort of their office that they actually have. They make note of that in this chapter, just sort of, how the Avatar seems to have, almost sort of like, an actual sort of like political sort of entity. I mean, the fact that they're able to sort of, barter all of these deals and sort of agreements between the nations just shows you sort of how sort of like important that sort of position is, and how, the person really has to sort of be groomed for it. So, it's just interesting just to see how Kyoshi's going to take, on this role, and how she's going to have, maybe a little bit of a checker past before she really gets to doing sort of like the traditional things that we sort of think of an Avatar doing here. But she's sticking by her previous sort of agreements that she has, which is also a more of a positive note of the Avatar in general, and that these are going to be the people that are going to sort of help her, essentially her sort of like initial group of Team Avatar.
The only other thing here is we get, I suppose, a Kyoshi and Laoji killing lesson here, basically. So he basically points out that, what way do you want to kill people? Like, you want to kill Jianzhu, so do you just want it to be in the middle of like a chaotic battle? You just happen to like throw a big attack and you take him out and that's it. And she specifically says, no, I want to look him in the eye when I do it, and it be personal, and have the full I killed you sort of effect. Um, and he says, okay, so what we're going to do when we get to the raid is that we're going to split off, and we're going to assassinate Governor Tay. So this is the guy who's obviously running this sort of prison that they're trying to get Mok's friend out of. So that's what they're going to do. They're going to kill the guy running it and sneak off and do that. Kyoshi immediately is like, why would we do that? And Laoji points out that he's brutally incompetent and corrupt. He lets his people go hungry. He skims from the Earth Kingdom taxes. And Kyoshi's like, those aren't excuses to murder him. And he says, you're right, they're not excuses. They're ample justifications. I guarantee you many citizens have suffered immeasurably from his greed and negligence, and many more will die if he's allowed to keep breathing. And it's just this kind of interesting back and forth that they have here about, like, Kyoshi wants to kill one person, but she kind of wants to do it in the right way. But Laoji is sort of pointing out that, like, I'm trying to teach you how to be an assassin here, which kind of involves assassinating people. But, like, she only wants to kill one person, but she wants to do it in such a specific way. What's really going on here in all of this? And she's kind of like, well, like, I could protect my identity as the Avatar if you, Laoji, were the one to kill Jianzhu. But it actually says, I don't care to kill Jianzhu. He's competent and he surrounds himself with competent people. I wish the Earth Kingdom had 100 Jianzhus. We'd enter a new golden age. And he doesn't want to intervene in basically Kyoshi's kill, effectively. That's what he kind of points out. It's interesting. He just kind of points out as well that, like, we're going into a battle where lots of people are going to die. Like, you have to accept that, are you going to be involved in that, or how will you accept when you kill someone, is what's being pointed out here. So they're setting up this idea with Kyoshi of her goal right now that she's so driven to do is to kill someone, but how will she actually deal with the fact that when she goes to kill someone, and that she'll be put in situations where she'll be asked to kill someone who's not Jianzhu, and she seems unwilling to do that right now. And it's a nice conflict. It'll obviously come full circle with the raid and what we're dealing with here, but I like what's being brought up here. It is Laoji really challenging her on a lot of points about the ways to kill people and stuff like this. It's an interesting conversation. But what are your thoughts, and what do you make of Kyoshi and Laoji's conversation here?
Yeah, no, he really is, challenging her sort of current idea on how to kill Jianzhu, and just sort of, just out of all the different ways that you could, potentially kill someone, this is the method that she's currently taking. But, it seems like she doesn't quite, grasp yet just sort of the idea of killing someone, and, everything else that sort of entails that, and just sort of, all the other people that could, potentially be hurt along the way here, and how, killing a random, Lauji's sort of like putting it to her, sort of like, what's the difference between, killing this person versus killing that person versus, the potential people that will get hurt during this raid that they're all sort of going on just to free, one specific person. It's just, it shows you just sort of, I guess Kyoshi's, her age and her maturity, and just sort of, her being so focused on this one goal that she hasn't really, got a full grasp on the sort of larger picture of things, which is something that, she's slowly coming to realize by, the end of this chapter, and just, the current chapters are coming up. So no, it's definitely, I don't know, I think it's cool how they're sort of laying that out. It's almost, Laoji, I mean, he's, sort of like, we're assuming some sort of like a master assassin, but he really has, I guess, sort of specific ideals on how he goes about killing people, and how, his actions are reflecting the world, and how that's similar to, what the Avatar does, just maybe on sort of like a smaller scale, although the way that he's doing it, his assassinations definitely affect things on a larger scale per se. But, it's definitely, it's just interesting to get that sort of contrast here. If this was, him speaking another sort of way, it could almost seem like he's sort of trying to talk her out of actually killing Jianzhu, because he does seem to do, more positive for the world rather than negative, despite, the way that he goes about things.
Yeah, like he kind of challenged her just on the point of like, to me, Jianzhu is helping things, and I don't want you to kill him, but you want to kill him. Yet, you seem to be against killing this guy who I've just explained to you is like completely corrupt and has led to the deaths of so many people.
Hmm.
Like, how do you kind of measure that up? And it's really sort of challenging Kyoshi to kind of form her sense of justice, which is like her thing. That's the thing about Kyoshi that we know about prior to this book. That's what she talks about. That's her advice to Aang. Only justice will bring peace, and she is the one to like most heavily advocate for the idea of, when Shin the Conqueror came, I killed him. That was it. Like, it may have been an accident, but I was going to kill him. And how does she kind of get from this sort of questioning attitude to being so driven and sort of deciding in certain moments when she will and will not kill someone? And I suppose the idea here is more like him saying there will be situations when you will have to consider killing people if you want to be a just avatar, but also situations where you may want to kill someone, you may have to reconsider it. I think that's what is being directly set up, and I actually do really like how it kind of comes to an end in terms of the character Kyoshi does kill versus a character who she doesn't kill, like by the end of the book, without spoiling it. Um, but yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Just like reflecting on Kyoshi, the legend that she kind of becomes, and like the bits we see of her in Avatar, and how they're sort of getting her from this early Kyoshi to that character in a way through Laoji and the situation she'll encounter, and how she'll use what she's learned from him.
I think that's probably one of the most interesting parts of this book, being a fan of the series in general, just because we know that she has such a strong sense of justice and sort of her ideals and her beliefs that, getting to see, how, we're being interpreted and how they're sort of being formed is definitely a pretty cool sort of aspect, because she's definitely, she definitely doesn't have that yet. It's all being sort of developed. I mean, she is, pretty young in this sort of book, in general. So this is definitely sort of like the first time that she's had to sort of encounter any of these sort of things. So no, I think that's definitely a cool part of the book overall. It's probably one of my favorite parts.
Yeah, like I think at points in this book you forget she's 16. She's 16 for all of this book because not that much time passes, and she's dealing with all of this stuff. Like, so much has happened to her already. So, definitely some big stuffs. But yeah, we get into the last chapter here that we're going to discuss in this podcast, chapter 21, preparations. So at the end of the last chapter plus this one, we get the start of her training basically, because going into this raid, Kyoshi still has no combat training, so apart from a little bit of firebending training she's done with Rangi, she needs to level up at everything. And right at the end of the last chapter, she basically discovers, from how she proved she was the Avatar by waterbending, that through channeling her bending through her mother's fans, she actually can gain a level of focus to do more subtle bending. So these suddenly open the door to her now being able to actually properly earthbend. That when she earthbends using the fans, she can control it so much better and is kind of immediately on a higher level than you would expect her to be. It's also revealed in this chapter that she's actually quite a good firebender. It's revealed she doesn't have to use the fans to firebend. It's a form of bending that can come quite easily to her because of, as they get into like the style of it. For her, she describes it as like it's just a thing you release rather than having to like focus on something, choose a size and scope and stuff like that. There's a lot of thinking that goes into what earthbending you're performing. That's what she struggled with in terms of being able to do big stuff. But firebending really, really suits her, and it probably helps that her teacher is her girlfriend as well at this point. And we see her getting training from Wong as well with the fans, and he's actually a really strict teacher. He's like singing the entire time. He's basically teaching her the theater stuff at the same time, as well as just the correct application of use of the fans, because I think they made a couple of jokes throughout the book of like her opening out the fans the wrong way and everyone being like, you're gonna break it, but she has to open it the right way. Yeah, she hasn't started waterbending training yet because Rangi's actually super superstitious about that. She thinks something terrible will happen if Kyoshi doesn't do the cycle in the correct order. So, obviously water is meant to be the last one for her to get to. And that's why Rangi's very fearful about her starting training with Kirima without having an airbending teacher around, because Rangi thinks if you break this cycle and do it in the wrong order, something horrible will happen. And it is just Rangi being superstitious, but it's also a little bit of like she's not quite liking Kirima, but Kyoshi notes actually how similar they are. And they don't do too much between the two of them, but I like the gradual, I suppose, begrudging respect that Kirima and Rangi grow to kind of have for each other, as we'll get to. But we get a training sequence again with firebending between Kyoshi and Rangi, and now that they're kind of in a relationship, Rangi sort of incorporating that into the training a bit of like Kyoshi has to maintain a stance and she kisses her while she's doing the stance, and Kyoshi somehow manages to maintain the stance. It's a very cute scene. I like seeing the kind of how their dynamic has changed since that big chapter 18 kind of back and forth and the start of their relationship. But yeah, lots of interesting stuff here. We'll get to the final scene in a second, but what are your thoughts on these few scenes? Basically, what level Kyoshi's bending is at this point, where her training is at.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting how they choose to show her sort of progression with these sort of elements, from her bending masters here, and just sort of, what aspects she's able to sort of key on better than others, and just sort of how the fans are able to sort of give her a sense of control despite it sort of being basically sort of like a cheat. And sort of like, just sort of how she's able to have control, since, usually, as they mentioned in this chapter, sort of, how using sort of elements or certain sort of weapons sort of like enhance your bending abilities, but this sort of works in sort of like reverse for her, because it's able to allow her to sort of like fine tune her bendings that, she might not have had without the fans, and they sort of, go back and forth about, what would she do if she didn't have them, and sort of, how that goes back and forth. But no, I think it's interesting to see. I think this is probably one of the parts where you get to see, the newfound dynamic that she has with the other members of the Flying Opera Company, and how they're sort of going about training her, how Juan, like you mentioned, is such a taskmaster, how even Lek is sort of like, he acts sort of a bit different, even though he's sort of like, technically around the same age or younger than her, how he's sort of, being like the Sifu snot nose, as he says in this one. So I don't know, I think it's a fun sort of scene of how all of her sort of masters are training her, how Rangi and their sort of relationship is working in this one, and how that sort of is used to her advantage to train Kyoshi. So I think it's all pretty cool in this one to see, each of the different ways and how, I think, they mentioned how Karima, how they, how she tries to get some training in, but that doesn't really work because of, how Rangi wants to keep the cycle going the right sort of way here. And just, I don't know, I think it's definitely, a cool, it would be one of those classic sort of like montage scenes that you see of, our main characters sort of leveling up their sort of abilities. So I think, for what it is and the period of time that they have, I think it works well.
Mm. And what do you actually make of that superstition? Like, it's never really been brought up, but like, do you think there is some sort of a problem that develops if an avatar like masters an element outside of the order of the cycle? Because it seems to be the idea that like it just works better if you do it the right way. In that like it's almost like the destiny of the avatar to train it in that order, and it seems kind of like something goes wrong. Like Aang tries to do fire like first or something like that back in the Deserter, and it kind of goes wrong. A problem happens, and it takes him until placing it in the right position to do it. So, did you think it is just a superstition, or do you think it is like some sort of built-in thing where it just works smoother to do it the right way?
I don't know. That's definitely a good question, and I don't know. I mean, from what we've seen so far, following the Avatar cycle from the beginning, how Juan sort of did it, it definitely seems to work smoother. I don't know. I think there needs to be probably just sort of like a level of sort of confidence in sort of the Avatar in general in order to sort of get a grasp on just the elements in general. And it seems like the one that is farthest away from their sort of natural element just seems to be sort of like the toughest one for them to sort of get through. So there probably is something to it. I don't know if it's sort of like an inbuilt thing, but it definitely seems like it holds some sort of like, bearing in mind as far as, which ones they're able to, sort of learn first. I don't know. I don't think it would be like such a catastrophe that, they learn one before the other. Because, it seems like the way that, or at least from what we've seen so far, that, certain ones can just sort of be picked up sort of intuitively or better off than without as much effort as some of the other elements. So despite that, I think some elements just come, like we've seen, some elements just work better for some avatars just because of just their nature or their personality.
Hmm. Yeah, that's what kind of some of the Rangi Kyoshi stuff gets into, and that like we get into the whole fire is the most affected by like inner turmoil, and you're getting fire so well because you're actually relaxed, but you shouldn't be relaxed because you're a Dao Fei avatar. That's a problem, and just Rangi continuing to like not like the structure the avatar is being trained in, but she's with Kyoshi, so she's kind of happy to go along with it, but she wants things her way. She wants things to be the normal way. She wants airbenders to be perfect monks and the avatar to get the right order of training and so on. But we get another Lao Ji scene here. He notes when Kyoshi arrives, your water and air chakras are overflowing. And it says it sounded like it was an embarrassment. And what's interesting here is that like this is a scene where if you know the chakras, if you remember the sequence and what they're all about, you get more meaning out of that than what's even described here in the book. And that the idea here is that the water is the pleasure chakra and the air chakra is the love chakra, and that's kind of what he's kind of pointing out in that like heart and sacrum are the locations as well and stuff like that. So it's a nice little reference, and it's another thing that makes the sort of Guru Patik sort of connection of like long-lived characters in the Avatar world being like experts of like the chi paths and chakra networks of the body. In that Guru Patik was all about that. He was 150 last time we saw him, and we assume he's still alive and stuff like that. And here's Lao Ji, who this chapter all book confirms is over 200 years old. It's interesting. Like Kyoshi brings up that she doesn't know what chakras are, and he says that he prefers working with people who have all 7 of them open or all 7 of them closed. So it says here, an accomplice with only some of their chakras unblocked can be easily swayed by their strongest, most gnarled up emotion. So he's kind of pointing out that like her air and water chakra are like wide open, but the one relating to grief is closed. So it's a bit of a problem and contradiction within her. And And it's just more the debate about what Kyoshi wants to do about the whole assassination attempt. She says, I don't know if I can help you kill the governor. Helping mock free a prisoner is one thing, but an assassination in cold blood is another. And this is where he brings up, have you ever heard of Guru Shokin? So this is a new guru we get introduced to. He was an ancient philosopher, a contemporary of Lahima's. Not as popular though. He had a proverb: if you meet the spirit of enlightenment on the road, slay it. And Kyoshi's like, I can see why he's not so popular. And it says, yes, he was considered heretical by some, but wise by others. One interpretation of that particular saying is that you cannot be bound by petty concerns on your personal journey. You must walk with singular purpose. The judgment of others, no matter how horrific or criminal they label your actions, must hold no meaning to you. And Kyoshi says that she can't do that. I care what she thinks of me. I don't know if I could handle disappointing her. And he points out, your hesitation seems to be less with your own morals than hers. In fact, with your firebender tethering you to this world, you might feel no compunction at all. Perhaps that's why you feel guilt. You're only one step away from Guru Shokin's ideal, and it disturbs you. And he reveals here, Yang Chen was a devoted reader of Shokin. She studies his opponents as well, but he doesn't want to go into the details. She then asks, are you him? Are you Shokin? And she just kind of goes out with a wild accusation, and he says, of course not. I was much better looking than that fool. Revealing basically that he knew him personally, I think is the idea, that he was around him to know what he looked like and know that he was better looking than him. So that's what confirms it, of just like contemporary of Lahima, the word ancient being mentioned in relation to these people. So realistically, the idea is that like he's over 200 years old. He's probably even older than that. I don't think they ever give you any sort of grounding in like the specific numbers beyond that initial he's over 200 years old. But what are your thoughts on this scene, and do you have any idea of what his age, Lao Ji's age, actually is?
Yeah, no, his age is definitely something that could be questioned for sure. I don't know. I wonder. I mean, I could see. I mean, considering I don't know the time scale of how we know things. I mean, him like 2, 3, something like, or even more. In sport doesn't seem so sort of far fetched. But the whole idea he's able to sort of discuss these sort of ideas of chakra and just sort of understanding just sort of how people react to things, I think is interesting, just because he has all this perspective. Like yeah, he's sort of like this sort of assassination type character who's been around for, I guess, centuries at this point, but he has this sort of idea about how to do things, and is even if it's not in sort of like the right sort of fashion, he's definitely teaching Kyoshi a lot as far as just sort of how to view things in the world, and how past avatars were, just because he's probably been around a lot of the other avatars at this point. So I don't know, I think that's definitely interesting. He's just the fact that he's the spiritual character like Guru Patik, I think is makes him all the more sort of interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just quickly looked it up on the wiki, and they're saying Guru Lahima is 3,829 before Aranoma genocide, which seems crazy. If I can't really remember where that came from. Like I know Tenzin, I think at some point in book 3 says something about like what era Lahima is from, but like I think the idea that he's like 3,000 years old seems excessive, even with the idea of being able to like enhance your age beyond what it should be. I'm not sure what really to make of that. So like, what did I do here? Let's see. He was an ancient philosopher, a contemporary of Lahima's, meaning they were at some point in or around the same age. And then he specifically says, I was much better looking than Shokin. So that means he was around during the same era as Shokin and Lahima, which apparently is over 3,800 years ago, which is at least 3,500 years before this point. I don't really know what to make of that. What are your thoughts on that, if that turns out to be true?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely would push his age quite up there, wouldn't it? I don't know. That seems interesting. I wonder. I mean, yeah, that seems pretty excessive to me as far as someone's sort of age in this world. But I don't know. I mean, we've seen, pretty odd things, all things sort of considered, but it definitely seems like he would be, I don't know, he might not be sort of quite as agile if he was quite to be that age, unless there's, some other factor or maybe some other rebirth aspect to his sort of character that we're not quite aware of. Then maybe I could see that being more sort of realistic if he was sort of around during essentially all of their times.
Hmm. But yeah, it makes him such an interesting character, definitely. There's there's obviously much more of the book to come. We'll cover that in the last podcast, the remaining 11 chapters. But that's sort of our middle section of just, Kyoshi sort of stabilizing things, getting her training, getting her new group, starting the relationship with Rangi, while Janzu begins to, try and search for her. So stuff is set in place. The raid is kind of about to happen shortly, and there's still a lot to come. So that's the impressive thing about the book, that it it just stuff keeps on happening, keeps on happening. There's new lore, detail reveals as the book continues to progress. It's really impressive. But like I said, we'll cover the next section on the next podcast. But yeah, that has been this episode of the Avatar Online podcast. It's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye bye.